Dr. Michael Wild. Welcome to our presentation this evening. We're here to learn about hypothyroidism. Most people come to our presentations because either they believe they've already been diagnosed with hypothyroidism or they believe they have that condition even though they have not yet been diagnosed. So I think we're all here really for one main reason. There's a systematic breakdown in our medical system when it comes to dealing with this condition, right? There seems to be a lack of information and misinformation, and people just don't seem to care about the information. So it gets very frustrating. It gets frustrating for me, which is why I started to do this work. Working with my patients over the years, I started to see it over and over and said, okay, someone's got to step up and do something about this. So I decided to make that a focus of my work. I'm frustrated for my patients on their behalf, and believe me, they're frustrated as you are. So we're going to learn tonight about how to end that frustration, because you're going to learn how to take control of the situation. You're going to learn there's more in your control than you previously thought was possible. Does that sound okay? All right. So we're going to work on that. So our problem is there's a situation going on that no one seems to know how to help. And I say seems because there is a way to help it. And we're going to talk about that. There are a group of doctors in the country who are working very hard at that. I belong to that group of doctors. There are 75 of us actually in the world now. We have a few doctors in other countries, predominantly in this country. I'm the only one in this state, unfortunately, doing this work. I'm trying to teach other doctors and get more information spread so people are more interested, because there's too many people to help. All right? Again, we only help so many people at once. I'd like to help everyone, but it's simply not possible. I don't have enough time in the day to do that. But there is help on the horizon, and we're going to talk about that. Christine, would you dim the lights for me? Now, I hope that's not too dark for you guys, but you can see the screen better that way. And if I hear anybody snoring, it's really not a problem. Just throw my mouse at you and we'll just go on, okay? So we're going to talk about the global pandemic of hypothyroidism. Now, you guys were nice enough to share with me a little bit about why you were here. Okay? You discussed with me your concerns, your problems. And what I want to do is talk a little bit more about who I am and why I think I can help you. My name is Dr. Michael Wild. I practice what's known as functional restorative medicine. Most people have not heard those terms before, not familiar with that. Functional restorative medicine is a branch of healthcare that focuses on not your symptoms, but on restoring the natural balance to all of your body's systems. Getting your endocrine or hormone balance back on track, getting your digestion back on track, getting your immune system back on track, getting your musculoskeletal system back on track, getting your nervous system back on track. Because these are the things that control your health, longevity, how much you like to be alive every day. So we want to improve that, okay? I created a program called Get Into Balance, and the N2 stands for neuronutritional. It's the neuronutritional approach to better health and healing. And what that is a culmination of my 25 years in practice. I started off as a functional neurologist, also known as a chiropractor. Been doing that since 1991. After doing that for about 5 years, I started to notice that people were really getting well very quickly at the onset. And then I started to notice it was more and more difficult for people to get well from the same types of conditions just with my chiropractic care alone. And I started to realize that I thought a big part of that was the toxicity in our environment was increasing. Right? Every day, a boatload of new chemicals are dumped into our air, our food, our water due to our industry and due to advances in technology. Right? Electromagnetic waves that we now know affect us. Don't keep your cell phone too close to your head too long, it may cause a brain tumor. Right? Don't keep it in your pocket, you may become infertile. Okay? Put it in your back pocket, you might get hemorrhoids. Not really. So I decided to look deeper at the role of toxicity in people's health and the role of nutrition in helping people overcome that toxicity. You see, when most people come to me, they come to me because most of us do view our body as a temple, right? We try to take care of it. But when people come to me, their temple's in ruins. And they're looking for someone to help them rebuild that temple. So when you're trying to rebuild any structure, the first thing you want is a proper foreman on the job who knows how to control and coordinate all the rebuilding efforts. In your body, that is the job of your central nervous system, your brain and spinal cord. It controls and coordinates the efforts of rebuilding, repairing everything in your body and all the functions of your body. You get the best form on the job, but you also have to build that building out of the best materials, right? And that's where nutrition comes in. You ever hear you are what you eat? Ultimately, what goes in your mouth is what your cells get built out of, right? So if you build your body on Twinkies and coffee, it's not going to be nearly as healthy as if you built a body on organic food, right? So we want to have the best possible control and coordination along with the best possible building materials. So I put together the neuro-nutritional approach to veteran health and healing, where we focus on what we call functional neurology and a special type of functional nutrition known as orthomolecular nutrition. Has anyone heard that term before? Orthomolecular means nutrition that is geared towards you as a specific individual, not in general, because we're all different, right? We all have our likes, our preferences, we all have our subtleties about us, we all have different personalities, we look physically different. Well, we all are different inside as well. Our immune systems respond differently to different things. And for that reason, broccoli may be perfect for you, but may be poison to you. Okay? You may be okay with red peppers, but not green peppers. You may be great to have turkey, but not chicken. So the specifics come down to how your immune system reacts to those foods, which has been changed and governed and dictated by every experience in your life. Your exposure to toxins in your environment, the foods you've chosen to eat, your emotional stress levels, physical traumas you've been through that have shaken up your system. All these will change the way your body interprets what you're putting in your mouth. So in orthomolecular nutrition, we look at you as an individual when we do some very specific laboratory testing that tells me where your unique weak links lie, so I know how to stop them, reverse them, and repair them. This is not a eat your veggies kind of seminar. Okay? Everybody knows that. But we're going to talk about specifics. Now, I don't know you as much as I'd like to know you. So I'm going to talk about some generalities tonight. But I can teach you a little bit more about how to get more particular about yourself. Okay, does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And we find we get the absolute best results when we do that. I'm also the author of a book called The Holistic Handbook for Optimal Health. And you can purchase that book at theholistichehandbook.com, but none of you have to do that because I'm giving you each a copy. Okay? You're getting a digital download of that. It's 209 pages long. And that is a self-help and self-health guidebook. And what I do is in the first half, I talk about concepts of health and nutrition. And the second half, I talk about specifics. Woke up today with a headache? Do this. Woke up today with a bellyache? Do this. Woke up today and your big toe is 3 times too big? Do this. Okay? So it has lots of specifics for the most common conditions. Basically what I did was I took the questions I heard over and over and over for about 20 years in my practice and decided, wouldn't it be smart to write this down once and hand it out? So that's what I did. Okay? If you do like the book and you want to share it, I ask that you don't give your free copy to other people, but ask them to pay the $9.95 to pay the publisher back for my book. Okay? If you don't mind. All right. Now, you shared with me why you're here, and I would like to take a few minutes to share with you exactly why I'm here and why I chose to do this kind of work. It's all because of my family. It's my wife, Linda, my son, Dylan, and my daughter, Caitlin. The kids aren't thrilled with these pictures because they're baby pictures. But this was back in 2001. Now, raise your hand if you remember 2001, particularly September 11th, 2001. Right? Unless you're living under a rock, we all remember that day. I remember exactly where, we probably can all remember exactly where we were, right? When we saw those images on TV, those horrific images. My wife and I were actually at the gym doing the stair climber side by side, watching the TVs, and our jaws just dropped because we're originally from New York. I have friends who died in those buildings. She had friends who died in those buildings. Her cousin was one of the only surviving firemen who now actually leads the tours at the memorial in New York City. Okay? When we saw those buildings coming down, we thought this had to be the most horrific thing that could possibly happen. Thousands upon thousands of people dying right before our eyes. It was just incredible. And I thought that was probably the worst thing that I could imagine happening. However, 1 month later, my belief changed. 1 month later, in October of 2001, is when we got the phone call that said that lump in Linda's breast was cancer. It was right before Thanksgiving, right? It was the very end of October. It was actually around Halloween, I should say. We were actually making our Thanksgiving plans. We were talking about my family coming down, and I remember Linda was making dinner, and when I got that phone call, she saw my face, and she just dropped the knife. She knew what it was. What was scariest to me at that time was that we found out that this was potential breast cancer. I said, what is potential breast cancer? And I said, well, we've got a lab result that says that that lump that Linda has had in her breast for 10 years was cancer, but we could not tell if it was invasive or not, had it spread. So I said, well, let's send that same sample to another lab. They sent it. That lab sent back a report saying, not only has it not spread, it's not even cancer. I said, okay, now I'm confused. Send it to a third lab. I need some kind of consensus. We sent it to a third lab, And the third lab said, not only is it cancer, it's fully invasive.
Good Lord.
Right? What are we supposed to do with that information? How confusing has our medical system become? Okay, here's something that we think should be pretty much cut and dry, right? Should be black and white. You look under the microscope, is it or is it not? Well, I got a very quick lesson in the fact that we don't know a whole lot. Okay? A lot of it is still guessing and conjecturing. It kind of like this, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Let's go with what most people agree with. Okay? And then we base protocols of treatment on that. Right? Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, maybe it's not even the right diagnosis. So we went back to our surgeon and he convinced us. He said, look, we got 2 out of 3 that says maybe it is. So why don't we go ahead and remove that lump, just to be on the safe side? And we said, okay, that makes sense. Let's do that just in case. Even though it had been there for 10 years, it never changed. And we really didn't, in my heart of hearts, I really didn't think it was anything that could be bad if it was there that long. But let's go ahead and remove it, which we did. And then, of course, they want us to go through the regular hoops of talking to the oncologist in regard to chemotherapy and radiation therapy, which, as we know, are the hallmarks of cancer care in this country, right? We cut it out, we poison it, we burn it, right? So we went to speak to the oncologist. The oncologist at first started talking about wanting to give them tamoxifen, which, is anyone here familiar with breast cancer or the use of tamoxifen? All right, tamoxifen is a biological agent, a type of chemotherapy that acts on enzymes that allow estrogen production to grow or not to grow. And you might know a lot of female cancers are driven by estrogen, because estrogen is a growing tissue in the body, right? Just like testosterone is. And so because it's a steroid anabolic growing tissue, it can make abnormal tissue grow faster. And so they want to use this medication that stops our body from making estrogen in order to stop this cancer from growing. So of course, before I went and did my homework, I come from a research background, so I could ask intelligent questions. And I said, okay, before we initiate this, how long do we want to take it? 5-year minimum. I said, okay, and what are we looking to achieve? Well, it's going to reduce the risk of developing cancer in the opposite breast by 50%. I said, wow, that sounds pretty promising. In how many people? So he looked at me kind of funny. And he said, well, let's look at the data. In 13% of the people who take it.
Wow.
I said, okay, so let's talk about what we know it will do. That might help, it might not. What will it do? Well, we know it will increase our risk of stroke. We know it will increase our risk of ovarian cancer. Okay? Stop one and start another. I said, does that make any sense at all? I'm starting to get a little wishy-washy about this. And they said, last question. Linda's 33 years old. In all the research I found, tamoxifen was never tested on a woman under the age of 50. Right? Because up to that point, breast cancer was considered a cancer of menopause. It happened when your hormones started changing. And so I said, what data do you have on me to show me how it's going to react in a 33-year-old woman's hormone balance? Because we can all agree that hormone balance of a 33-year-old is a lot different than a 50-year-old, right? And he said, we have no data whatsoever. It's never been studied. We have no idea. I said, but you can prove that it's going to be damaging and harmful. I said, does that make any sense to you? And he looked at me and said, you know what? She shouldn't take it. All right? You have to be your own best advocate. You have to present questions. They then said, but of course you have to talk to the radiation oncologist. So we went to the radiation oncologist, and she started talking all about how we absolutely, positively had to get radiation done, because even though we removed the tumor, there's absolutely no way that you get all the cells. And that's true. All right? Anyone who's ever had cancer or no one who's had cancer, does it ever come back? Right? It almost always comes back within just a couple of years. Right? Usually within 3 years, 90% of cancers return that were considered to be in remission. Why does it happen if we think we got it all? Because we never get it all. Because what we don't see are the cancer cells known as stem cells, which are the baby cancer cells, that have already gone to the bloodstream. They're what we call circulating tumor cells. And in our new technology, one thing that they do is usually run a blood test to look at your circulating tumor cells to see what's still going on away from the little thing that we can see that we removed. Okay? So she wanted to do radiation. And I said, okay, but my concern is this. Does radiation not cause cancer? Well, yes, it does. Right? And in that kind of situation, do we know for sure if we even have cancer here? No, we don't. And so, well, I've got some problems with that. I've got some issues with that. Why would we choose a treatment that we know causes cancer? We're not even sure we have cancer in the first place. She didn't like that. She put her hand up in front of my face, up like that, the universal symbol for shut the hell up. Right? Stood between me and my wife and said to her, if you listen to him, you'll die. If you listen to me, you'll live. Which one do you want? Can you imagine the position that put her in? Now, I've never hit a woman, but I wanted to then. Okay? I was not happy. I was appalled that she would even say that and put her in that position instead of trying to talk logically about the issue. Okay? This was a fear tactic because she wanted her way. Well, my wife burst into tears. She didn't know what to do. She turned to me and she said, you know, I love you and I trust you, but you're not an expert in this field. And I'll tell you, I wasn't then, but I am now. I have to, as she said, defer to the experts. And I said, you know what? It's your body, not mine. You do what you think is right, and I'm going to support you in whatever your decision is. Even in the back of my mind, I was saying, please, please, please don't do this. But she decided to do it. And she went at this time to get radiation daily for 6 weeks. She would drop the kids off at preschool, and she would go every day, and she'd get radiation therapy, which burned her skin, which made her hair fall out, and made her throw up every day. But the doctor said, well, it doesn't have any side effects. It can't be. I said, well, it happened the day she started doing it, and happened every day since, so don't tell me it can't be. All right, just because it doesn't fit the textbook normal. So they said, okay, let's go through all this radiation therapy, and we're going to keep doing mammograms. More radiation, right? And we're going to do them at first every 3 months. Then we're going to do them every 6 months. Then we're going to do them every year. And if you go through 5 years of not having a recurrence of an obvious sign of this cancer, we're going to consider you cured. They don't use those words very easily, right? So 5 years went by, and we didn't have it returned. So we thought, holy cow, this is awesome, right? I wanted to have a big party. But Linda could not let it go. She had fear in the back of her mind every single day. She was not ready to put that down. Linda was the toughest woman I ever met. From a girl from Brooklyn, New York. You don't mess with her. I learned that the hard way many times. Okay? But I found her crying every single day for years. Fear about, did we get it all? Will it come back? Did I give it to Caitlin? Right? And I can understand those fears. It was just a horrific time in our lives to go through and see this. It got even more horrific 10 years later, 11 years later, in 2011. This is when something strange started happening to Linda. And she started to say, I just don't feel right. And we started to notice that her breast started to become more tender. As a matter of fact, at one point our dog actually jumped on her and hit her right in the breast where she had the lump removed, and that pain did not go away for months. So I dragged her down to the doctor and said, we've got to get this looked at. Something's not right. And when we looked at her, they found a big blood blister under the surface, a hematoma. And they said it was from the trauma of the dog jumping on you. We usually don't see this unless you get like in a car accident or something really significant, but it must have been from the dog. Come back in 3 months, it should be gone. We came back in 3 months and it was bigger. They said, okay, well, you have a lot of scar tissue in there from the old radiation we did. So maybe it can't reabsorb the tissue the way it normally should. It couldn't reabsorb the blood. So come back another 3 months. We came back in 3 months. Instead of it being 1, there were now 3. And they said that's completely normal. The first thing that happens is it breaks up and it gets smaller so the body can reabsorb it. Come back another 3 months. Here we are a year later now, right? So we come back another 3 months, and actually 2 days before that visit, Linda took off her bra and I saw a big purple blood blister mass coming out the side of her breast. And she had known it was there and was coming through, but she was so shell-shocked by her whole experience that she dug her head in the sand and didn't tell me. She would just hide herself. When I saw it, I said, what the hell is that? And she said, oh, it's been there for about a week. Okay? So I said, well, we're not waiting 2 days, we're going right in. We went right in, they did a biopsy, and they said, don't worry, we'll have our results in just a couple of days. A couple of days went by, a couple of weeks went by, 7 weeks went by. And we did not have an answer. Can you imagine the anxiety in my house? I'm getting anxious thinking about it. Finally, we get the phone call from the doctor who said, I'm so sorry it took so long. This was a unique situation. We had to send these samples around to 7 of the major cancer centers in the United States to try to get consensus. And they finally all agreed this is a horrible beast of a cancer called Angiosarcoma, and it was caused by the radiation therapy we gave her. It's secondary to radiation. I was just a little pissed off. So instead of ranting and raving, I said, okay, we understand what the problem is, what's the game plan? And they took me aside and said, the game plan is you go home and get ready to die. He said, because 90% of the people will die within 2 months of first finding any sign of this, and you found it a year ago. 7% of people will die within 2 years. 3% of people we consider this success because they lived 3 years. And no one lives beyond that. So they all threw their hands up in the air and refused to do anything to help her. They said, that's it. I wasn't willing to accept that, as I don't think any of you would be here, right? So after lots of arguments and going back and forth and yada, 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 no one would help us. They dragged the time out and out and out. And it turned out that this cancer eventually spread to every part of Linda's body. It was in every bone in her body except for 2 vertebrae. It was in both her ovaries. She had 9 tumors in her liver. She had a tumor the size of a volleyball in her pelvis. And it was in the covering of her entire organ systems. It was everywhere. And you can only imagine, with all the cancer through your bone like that, the bone's expanding and breaking. We'd be sitting at the dinner table. She would pass, the salt, and her ribs would break. And she would scream. And she was tough, tough, tough. And she'd go right back to the conversation. Right where she was. Okay? It was crazy. You might notice in this picture, here we are. Notice the date. 3 years later. Whoa. Sorry. 3 years later. Right? When was she supposed to be dead? Right? What I had done is I was not willing to give in. So I said, okay, just because you don't know how to do something doesn't mean that no one knows how to do something. And just because our FDA only allows certain things to be done in this country doesn't mean things aren't done differently outside this country. So I have my own particular view of cancer and my view of how it starts and how it should be stopped. And it has nothing to do with the tumor. It has everything to do with the immune system. Right? We treat cancer in this country the same way we treat pimples. So here's this growth we don't like. So maybe we put some drugs on, some chemotherapy, and try to make it go away. If that doesn't work, we hit it with some UV light and try to irradiate it. We use radiation. If that doesn't work, we finally cut it off. Okay? But what actually causes the pimples? Well, that happens 10 steps before, right? That's the dietary problems, the emotional stress, the things that change our hormone balance, that create oil secretions, that lead to these changes, right? Possibly exposure to certain toxins or medications that disrupt the way our body works. Well, it's the same way with cancer, right? It's not the tumor or the aberrant cell. It's this 10 steps before that, where something went wrong with the immune system, where it was not able to recognize the cancer to stop it, or it was not strong enough to do the job. So I focused my research on that. And what I started to do is I didn't want Linda to get upset or nervous or worried. I didn't want her to think that anything was wrong. By the way, I never let her hear what the doctor said. She never knew how much time she was supposed to have. I was told from day one, this is a bad situation, but don't worry, we're on it. Okay, we're going to figure out a way to help you. And she didn't have a lot of faith in the doctors anymore. And I said, I'm going to run point on this, and I'm going to get these guys to help me, not the other way around. Okay? And that's what we did. So I started slipping out of bed in the middle of the night when she was sleeping. I would sleep 2 or 3 hours, and I would go downstairs and go on the computer, and I would study for anywhere from 5 to 8 hours every day for 5 months straight, looking at immunotherapy treatments from around the world. And I found 500 treatments that showed some promise. I narrowed it down to 50 that I thought were the best, most reproducible, the best research. I narrowed that down to a dozen that I thought I could actually do this at home. Because was I going to get help from traditional, conventional medicine? No, right? So I started using these therapies with her, and she started to improve. Her blood work turned around and started to normalize. Her pain started to go away. She started to come back to life instead of just sitting on a couch all day long, not being able to move. She wanted to go out shopping. She wanted to go out and have fun with her friends, right? So things started to get better. At one point, we had a barbecue for our friends, and after everybody had left, Linda was sitting in her favorite chair watching TV, and I was washing the dishes. And suddenly, she let out a blood-curdling scream like you'd never heard before. And she just kept screaming and kept screaming. I ran right over to her and I said, "What's wrong?" And she was looking right through me like I wasn't there, saying, "Someone help me, someone help me, someone help me." And she couldn't even see me. She started clawing at the walls and was ripping her own fingernails off. Obviously, I knew something was wrong, right? Something had changed from 5 minutes ago when she was laughing and having a good time. She finally focused on me, grabbed me, and said, "You have to kill me now." She said, "This pain is unbearable." What had happened was she was on multiple types of narcotics, the strongest stuff you could be on, orally, injections, and transdermal patches, in order to control the pain she was having from all this cancer throughout her bone. And she reached a point where her brain and nervous system said, "No more. We reject this." And no longer allowed the medication to come into her brain. All the pain flooded her at once. It was like getting hit by a bus and being run over back and forth. So I rushed her to the hospital. where they tried to modulate her pain. And on a 0 to 10 scale, for us, she was probably at a 15. And they got her down to about an 8, and she thought that was wonderful, right? And that would last a couple of hours, and then start going back up again. So we had to keep playing this game of trying different drugs and trying different combinations and trying to switch things around because her brain just kept rejecting. Now, she was in the hospital for a full week, and I was not able to do any of my immunotherapies with her because they wouldn't let me do it in the hospital. And part of her treatment induced a strong reaction from her immune system. So she had a fever of about 102 to 103 every day for a month before we went to the hospital. Okay? She was throwing up over and over. Now that sounds very uncomfortable, and it is, but that's a sign of a properly functioning immune system. Okay? It's trying to kill something and get it out. A week into her care in the hospital, her fever broke, and everyone in the hospital got all excited. Oh, thank God, her fever broke. I said, what are you talking about? That's the worst possible thing that could happen. It's the first sign that our immune system is giving up. And they always make kind of like my dog looks at me, right? What are you talking about? He says, no one remember basic physiology? What is a fever? It's what the body uses to initiate the immune system cascade. Okay? It releases calcium from your muscles when you shudder so you can feed your immune system. It raises the temperature to kill off invading organisms. It serves a purpose. They all went, oh, that makes sense. And they all looked at her and said, oh, her fever broke. Over the next week, I watched her get worse and worse. I asked for all her blood work from every day and looked at it, and I saw her blood work going downhill, day by day by day. I finally saw her liver shut down, and then saw her kidneys shut down. Now, did you guys notice in the pictures? Let me go back for a second. Do you notice a difference between the picture of her standing with the kids earlier and then the picture here? Look at her face. Look at the difference. Do you see something different there? Mm-hmm. Right? Is she thinner in one and heavier in the other? Mm-hmm. So in a matter of just a couple of years, she gained 75 pounds that no one could explain. Mm-hmm. No one had any idea what was going on with her. They just told her, work out more and eat less. And we walked out of the office. She said, if I get it one more time, I'm going to personally go back and go postal. Right? It was not a matter of exercise more and eat less. Okay, because she did that, believe me. All right? But she kept gaining more and more weight. Not one doctor had an answer for her. Well, when she was in the hospital for those 2 weeks, it suddenly dawned on me in the middle of the night. I was sleeping next to her because I would never leave her side, which no one should ever leave anybody's side in the hospital, I'm telling you right now. Okay? So I would just stay there until my son could get there. I'd run home and take a shower, come right back. But in the middle of the night one night, it just dawned on me, the majority of the symptoms that she's having excess weight gain for no apparent reason. Her skin's getting dry. She kept telling me my hair's falling out. She had overwhelming fatigue. Sound familiar? Mm-hmm. Right? She had constipation. Her sex drive started to wax and wane. Right? And it just dawned on me, oh my gosh, she's got hypothyroidism. The thing I help everybody with. Right? But I couldn't see the forest through the trees because I was so caught up in the cancer, as every other doctor was. So in the middle of the night, I went and asked them to do a blood draw, and I asked them some very specific tests. And they couldn't understand why I was asking for those, because no doctor asked for these, but I did. In the morning, I came in, and man, were the results outrageous. Everyone here familiar with TSH? Thyroid stimulating hormone? So if you ever get blood work done for your thyroid, they're looking at your TSH level, right? And does anyone know what a normal is supposed to be? They say anywhere between 0.5 and 5.5, depending on the lab you look at, 4.5, 5.5. So 0.5 to 5.5. Linda's was 278. Think she had a problem? Right? And no one had picked up on this before. So her oncologist came in the morning and he said, hey, someone ran thyroid profiles on her. I said, yeah, that was me. He said, why would you do that? So I explained and he said, wow, I didn't think about that. I said, neither did I. Right? Because we're all caught up with that gorilla in the room, the cancer. So he said, well, great, I'm going to get her some Synthroid. And I said, oh, no. No. That's the worst possible thing you could do. He said, what are you talking about? Synthroid fixes thyroids. I said, well, in 1 out of 27 different types it does. And he looked at me like I was crazy because he had no clue what I was talking about. And I said, I know this isn't your field. Can you get me an endocrinologist to talk to? And he said, nope, they don't come to the hospital. So what do you mean they don't come to the hospital? I said, did you never have diabetic emergencies? He said, well, we just handle that in emergency medicine, and then we ship them out to the endocrinologist a couple of weeks after they're out of the ER. I said, well, I need someone who understands what I'm talking about right now. And he just couldn't get it. I said, okay, let me just take you through the steps. And I started explaining the physiology about why that would actually hurt her more than help her with her kind of hypothyroidism. And he just looked at me and he said, I'm sorry, this is over my head. I'm just going to give it to her. And he walked out with it. So then I had to stand guard. And every time the nurse tried to give it to her, I had to grab it and say, no, let me explain to you why, and dump it in the toilet. Finally, they was walking in the room and hand it to me, there you go. And I would dump it in the toilet because they understood. Okay? So the reason I'm talking about cancer tonight is because of what Linda went through and what I learned about hypothyroidism more so than what I knew before. What I learned about cancer, much more so than I learned before. And notice, here's one person who had two things, right? You have to realize that all your hormones work in conjunction with each other. Hormones are the communication system of your body. And when one hormone gets out of balance, it will affect the balance of all other hormones. And there are some key systems that work together. Your thyroid, your adrenal glands, your sex glands, testosterone and estrogen, and your insulin and pancreas, very tightly woven together. And when one goes out of balance, it's going to affect all others, and we're going to develop problems in all these areas given enough time. Now, in Linda's situation, we knew that her sex hormones were involved with the cancer, but also her body's ability to take in sugar and be able to use it. Her body's ability to handle stress was being dramatically affected by her hormones, and it was all driving her cancer. But at the same time, it also drove hypothyroidism, because there is a commonality. There is something that these things share that is at the core of hypothyroidism, is at the core of cancer. It's also at the core of heart disease, dementia and Alzheimer's, diabetes, various autoimmune diseases such as rheumatoid arthritis, MS, lupus. They all stem from the same common denominator. That's called inflammation. Specifically, cellular inflammation. And we're going to talk more particularly about that tonight, about what causes it and what cures it. Because if this is the middleman that causes all these problems, wouldn't you like to know how to get rid of that? And let me give you a little hint. Taking NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen, Nuprin, Advil, Motrin, causes more inflammation inside your body. Nice little catch-22. They cause damage to a particular part of your body that drives inflammation through the whole rest of the body, and I'll talk about that tonight. So that is not the answer. Don't go home and start overdosing on that stuff thinking you're going to cure your cancer. Okay, or you're going to cure your hypothyroidism, or your heart disease, or your diabetes. That is not the answer. Out of the pain that I went through with Linda, it ignited a passion in me to be here in front of you. Here's my dog Rocco, who also wouldn't leave her side. He's the one you remember who actually first found that cancer when he hit her in the breast saying, look mom, look here. And here he was the day before she died. She died 1 year ago, October 1st. That's why I'm here. Okay? I'm here to make sure that doesn't happen to any of you. Because I'll be damned if we let one problem steamroll into another because no one taught you it's all connected. I'm going to teach you how to change that. You guys with me? All right? Let's do that. What we're going to learn tonight is there's a difference between success and failure. When we look at any endeavor a group of people try to go through, if we look at statistics, we can clearly see that 3% of the people who initiate that endeavor go on to finish it successfully, while 97% fail. That seems a little crazy, doesn't it? Well, let me ask, has anyone here ever been to any kind of seminar before where they got good information? Anyone? All right? Anyone take a class they really liked and said, boy, I'm going to start doing that in my life. And then what happened? You took all the information, you went home, you put it on the shelf, and said, I'm going to do that soon. Right? Just as soon as I get time in my schedule, right? We also have to live on what we call someday I'll. Someday I'll do this, someday I'll do that. And while you live on someday I'll, the thing you get really good at is shooting all over yourself. Right? I really should do this, I really should do that. And that doesn't get us anywhere. Right? So I'm going to beg you, stop shooting all over yourselves, okay? Move off of someday aisle and be a 3%er. The difference between the success and failure is one word: action. Raise your hand if you believe knowledge is power. Okay? I don't believe that. Okay? Knowledge is gathering dust.
You don't take action.
Exactly right. Knowledge you act on is powerful. So don't let me hear that you guys went home and didn't do something I told you to do tonight. Okay? Because I'm not going to be responsible for your failure. I'm going to try to be responsible for your success. Let's all agree we're going to try to be 3%ers. Act on at least one thing I teach you tonight. I'm going to teach you a lot of stuff. Act on one. All right? This is a 4-hour seminar packed into 2 hours. I'm going to go over a lot of information. Feel free to take notes. Please do not raise your hand to ask questions. If you haven't guessed by now, I like to talk, and I will go off on tangents, and this will become a 4-hour presentation. Write down your questions, shoot them to me in an email. I'll answer every single one of your questions. Okay? But I'm going to try not to interrupt what we're going to talk about tonight because we'll be here forever. Okay? All right, let's talk more about that cellular inflammation because that's what it really comes down to. This is why we're here, folks. We need to understand what causes it and what cures it. So let's talk about our cells. Here's a little old cell. Now, research shows us that our average body is made up of 100 trillion cells. Who counted that? Right? 100 trillion cells. Now, if we take that cell and we cut it open, we see this cross-section. And we're going to go back to biology class in high school here, but you might remember inside the cell, we have a center part called the nucleus. And in the nucleus, we have our genetic material, our DNA and RNA. And then we also have tiny little organs in that cell, just like we have organs in our body. Each cell has tiny little organs called organelles. And the one we're going to talk most about tonight is this little red guy here called mitochondria. Mitochondria, you might remember, are the energy powerhouse of the cell. They actually take a molecule of glucose from our food and convert it through something called the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle into units of energy called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. ATP is your TNT. It's a spark of life in your body. If these little guys don't convert your sugar into ATP, you get sick and die. Think these guys are important? Like to learn how to make them healthy? All right, let's do that. So we're also going to notice that our cell is made up of an outer covering called a membrane, an outer cellular membrane, much like the skin on the outside of your body. And just like our skin, we have little pores that let certain things in. We rub that nice cream on you to get some nice soft skin going, and also lets waste out through sweat, right? Well, if we break down that membrane and look at it really close, this is what we're looking at. We notice it's actually 2 layers. We have these little blue spheres connected to these little rods. The blue spheres are fat. We have 2 kinds of fat that make that up, and the rods are phosphorus. So this is called a phospholipid bilayer. And this is what makes up every single cell in our body. Now notice that things have to get in and out of that, and they go through these little channels. Okay? So we let good guys in, and we let bad stuff out. But there's little keys here, little keyholes, I should say, that good guys have to be able to fit to get in. So not just anything can get into the cell if it's working well, and waste has to get out. And once it gets in, it goes to different parts of the cell to make things work right. Okay, is that clear? All right. Now, if every single cell in your body is made up of 2 fats, you think it'd be important to eat those fats? Right? They make up every single cell in your body. If you don't have enough of them, you cannot have healthy cells. And let me explain something. Since we're made up of all these cells, if your cells are not well, you cannot be well. Right? Cells come together to make tissues. Tissues come together to make glands and organs. Glands and organs come together to make systems. Systems come together to make a human being. So when we start to have symptoms of disease and dysfunction occurring in our bodies at the system level, at the organ level, at the tissue level, where's it really coming from?
Cellular.
The cell, right? It's the cellular level. So we have to improve the health of the cellular level in order to get well, which is why I'm known as a cellular healing specialist. That sounds cool, doesn't it? Right? But that's what I now devote my life to. So, we all agree, very important to eat these 2 fats. Yet you've been told by conventional medicine to never ever eat these fats. They're called cholesterol and saturated fat. Makes up every cell in your body. Your brain is 80% cholesterol by weight. Every single nerve fiber in your body carrying the spark of life is coated in cholesterol like the plastic on a wire. Okay? Cholesterol makes every single one of your 600 hormones in your body. Without enough cholesterol, you can't make hormones. And I can't tell you how many women come back into my practice smiling, saying, "Thank you so much for helping my husband's cholesterol problem." Okay? Without cholesterol, you can't make hormones. And so we have a big problem going on in this country. We have a big misunderstanding of the role of cholesterol. All we know is that number's too high, let's bring it down. Who's asking why it's high and doing anything about that? Well, they tell you, well, just don't eat cholesterol, right? Cut out cholesterol in your diet. Well, how much of the cholesterol in your body actually comes from your diet? Depending on the research you look at, 10 to 20%. You can cut out all the cholesterol in the world from your diet and still have high cholesterol. Okay? So let's ask a logical question. If my cholesterol is going up, why? Why would my body do that? My body's really smart. Why would it raise cholesterol? Because it's made by my liver. And why would my liver make more? Well, either my hormones are out of balance, so I'm trying to make more gas for my hormones, because they're all made from cholesterol, or my inflammation levels are too high. What does cholesterol have to do with that? Well, when you have inflammation, what happens when something's inflamed? When you have a cut that's inflamed, does it get hot? Right? There's a sticky, ooey gooey stuff come out sometimes, right? When we have inflammation and infections, things get hot and sticky. So let's say that we have inflamed blood vessels that are now hot and sticky. Okay? What do we want to do? We want to calm that down. We want to coat it. What's our body's number one fireman? Cholesterol. It comes in and coats the blood vessel to put out the hot stickiness that's going to damage that blood vessel. Now what happens when that hot stickiness doesn't go away, because whatever you were doing to cause it continues? We get another layer of cholesterol, and another layer, and another layer, and another layer, until ultimately it blocks off the whole artery, and now we have a heart attack. When that happens, was that the cholesterol's fault? Or was it the inflammation's fault? Right? Inflammation is the culprit. Cholesterol is just a reaction, a healthy reaction. But if it keeps happening because you never got to the cause of the inflammation, we now have a problem. And there can be many causes of inflammation. The biggest causes in our diet are sugar and trans fats. Okay? Trans fats are anything that's hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated. Now don't be fooled by the label. It says 0 grams trans fats. Because you know the food industry is allowed to lie. They asked the FDA, so if we just have a little in there, can we say 0? And they said, sure, you can have up to half a gram per serving. Now, when you eat that bag of potato chips, are you eating 1 serving? All right, how many servings are in that bag? 4, 6, right? And you're sitting down, you're watching a movie, you're eating the whole thing.
You eat just one.
All right, can't have just one. Because they also put ingredients in there that make your brain desire more. And whenever you hear of MSG, monosodium glutamate, we hear sodium so we think it's salt. It's not salt. It's a flavor enhancer. That's what they call it. What it really is a neurochemical that increases your desire to eat more of that food. Okay? So they put it in the food because then you want more. You ever eat Chinese food and you're hungry an hour later? Okay? So, along the same lines, we want cholesterol. We want healthy fats. We don't want trans fats. We don't want sugar, which raises that inflammation. Okay? And we're going to talk a little bit more about the best sources to get those from as we go along. Everybody with me? All right. So let's talk about cellular inflammation causing disease. We talked before about how it's related to all those different diseases, right? That sounds incredible. Now, there can be lots of different things that cause inflammation. And then inflammation can become multiple different diseases based on multiple factors that relate to you as an individual, right? What kind of things are you eating? What kind of stresses are you exposed to? What kind of toxins are you exposed to? What kind of exercise are you doing? What kind of genetics do you have? All these things will determine which of those diseases you develop from that inflammation. So it's different for different people. But what research has shown us is that if you were lucky enough to live long enough while having those problems, you would eventually develop all of them. Now, no one lives that long. One thing or the other kills them before that happens. But if you could live long enough, you would develop all those problems because they all come from the same source once it starts. Now, a lot of people say to me, wow, so this was in Discover's Science section, talking about how inflammation is related to things like cancer, autism, how eating the right kind of fat makes you live longer. We also talk about Time magazine, talking about the secret killer. the link between inflammation and heart attacks, cancer, Alzheimer's, and other disorders, including hypothyroidism. Now, how many people have heard this? And the doctors already talked to them all about this. One person in a room. One person in a room of what we have? About 40 people here. Well, maybe the information is too new, right? You know, medicine's really slow to change anything. Some doctors I talk to are still looking over the edge to make sure they don't fall off the edge of the earth. Okay? Some people, unfortunately, take a long, long time to catch up. And in the medical field, it typically takes about 20 years for a new idea to catch on, because no one likes to change the status quo. Well, we're about due, because if you look at the data on this, this is actually 15 years old. Okay? So this is not new information. This is not new information. This has been out there for a long time, yet you still haven't heard about it, right? Well, we're going to teach you about it tonight. So let's talk about hypothyroidism specifically. Hypothyroidism is a massive pandemic. Let's look at these numbers. There are 27 million Americans with hypothyroidism in the United States. But when we go back and look at the data in their charts, we find that only half of them have been diagnosed correctly. Not only that, thyroid conditions are the #1 endocrine, which means hormone disorder in the United States. So is the solution taking more and more Synthroid, or levothyroxine, or Levoxyl, synthetic thyroid hormone? Right? Raise your hand again if you took those and it solved all your problems. Right? Again, not one hand raised in the room. Yet many of us are on it, and we know it's not the solution. So what's going on? Now, the big problem with thyroid disease is it doesn't just affect your thyroid. Earlier when we started, I talked about how thyroid hormone affects every part of your body. As a matter of fact, we talk about our cells, and our cells having membranes, and those membranes having receptors that are like special keyholes. Well, every single cell in your body, every one of your 100 trillion cells, has a receptor for thyroid hormone. That means thyroid hormone has some effect on every single cell in your body, but we don't understand it yet. Okay, but we do know it plays a role. We know a lot of things it does, but we don't understand everything there is about it. So when you start having thyroid problems and you're not having proper thyroid function in your body, it doesn't just affect your thyroid. It affects lots of other areas. As a matter of fact, it can lead to obesity. And we here seem to be gaining weight they can't get rid of, right? It can lead to a blocked aorta and even heart attack. Anyone here having any heart problems?
Chest pains.
Chest pains, palpitations, shortness of breath. It can lead to depression. Sounds familiar, right? And anxiety, psychosis. And if we know anybody who has hypothyroidism long term, you know they're crazy. Right?
We all know.
Because it completely changes the way your brain works. It can lead to seizures, memory loss, mood changes, and even perimenopause. Raise your hand if you've been told you're in perimenopause. Okay? Now, for women who are in perimenopause or went through it, how long did perimenopause take?
It's been 4 years so far.
Years. How long for you?
4 years
4
so
years,
far.
over 10 years. Okay? And this is non-usual. I hear on average 5 to 10 years. How long is it supposed to take? 6 months to a maximum of 2 years. What's wrong with this picture?
A lot of power surges.
Hormones. Hormones are what's wrong with this picture. An imbalance of hormones that's causing your body to not make that transition the way it's supposed to. So when your ovaries ramp down, your body still needs estrogen. So other glands are supposed to pick up where the ovaries are slacking off. And they're supposed to ramp down. They're no longer needed for having a baby, right? So we want other areas to pick up. And we're going to learn a little bit more tonight about the one particular gland that's supposed to pick up called the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands do lots of things for you. We most commonly know them as our stress glands, our fight or flight hormone producers. But they make lots of hormones for us, one of them being estrogen. And guess what, guys? Your testicles make estrogen too. Okay? As does your adrenal glands. We all have the same hormones, just in different ratios. Okay? So it's important to have a proper balance. Now, when the ovaries go down and the adrenals are supposed to ramp up, if those adrenals, because they are fight or flight hormone producers, are whooped and tired, they just can't do their job. Right? And if they can't do their job, the body says, okay, well, I got to go someplace else to make this fat. Well, where do I go? Well, the third best place to get to get estrogen is abdominal belly fat. So you'll start growing abdominal belly fat. If your ovaries are going down and your adrenals are not strong enough, you'll start to develop abdominal belly fat. Right? Get the muffin top from hell. Right? Now, as your ovaries start to decline, if there's an imbalance there and that starts to happen early, you start to gain weight around your butt and your thighs. If your adrenal glands specifically go down, it starts to go in your belly. If your thyroid starts to be affected, you get heavy all over. Okay? Because it will affect all the glands. Your thyroid gets involved with your adrenals, your ovaries, and your liver. And you start gaining weight over your whole body. So think about it. Could you have a hypothyroid condition and not even know it? Well, absolutely, because a lot of people have symptoms that start long before they're ever diagnosed or before anything ever shows up on a blood test. And these are just the more common symptoms that are associated with hypothyroidism. Now, look familiar to anything? Right? Weight gain, sleep problems, hot flashes, hot surges, cold hands or feet in general. Does anyone feel like it's cold in here? Right? Most of you do. You're wearing sweatshirts. I'm sweating, folks. Okay? It's not cold in here. All right? Depression, thinning of your hair, especially the outer 1/3 of your eyebrows. Anyone losing the outer 1/3 of their eyebrows? Right? I can walk up to most women and just be talking to them and tell them right away, you have a hypothyroid problem. And I'll say, what are you talking about? I can tell just by looking at them. Okay? Brain fog, dry skin, infertility, constipation.
Not so much that.
Okay? So what's the solution? Well, it's really easy. Get rid of the cause. That makes sense, right? So the question is, what is the cause? And that really depends on who you ask. Some people will tell you it's your genetics, right? We've heard a little bit about people talking about genes. We know it runs in the family. And genetics do play a role, but they are not the end all. What you're going to learn is that geneticists have a saying. They say genetics loads the gun, your environment pulls the trigger. And your environment is how you live your life and what you've been exposed to. Okay? Another way of looking at it is, we're all born with a certain deck of cards. But no one taught you that you're actually allowed to ask the dealer for new cards. All right? So I want you to wake up tomorrow and say, hit me. All right? I want some, not to your spouse, I want some new cards. Okay? Is it just getting old? Well, I don't believe that at all. I see women and men, but mostly women, suffering from this younger and younger and younger. One of my newer patients is 17 years old. Okay? A lack of hormones? Well, I think we covered that base already. Just by throwing more and more synthroid at you, without knowing what the problem is, doesn't fix the problem. That's about as smart as pouring gas on the hood of the car and hoping it gets in the engine. Right? Does that make any sense at all? Of course not. It's ridiculous. There is a cause, and I'm going to teach it to you tonight, and when you remove it, the body can and will heal itself. So let's uncover the truth. Let's first talk about the lies you've been fed. Well, lie number one, hormones such as synthroid, which is T4, Levoxyl, which is T4, and levothyroxine, which is T4, and others are your only answer. When the reality is that 80% of the time, thyroid hormone does nothing to relieve the symptoms of hypothyroidism long term and never fixes the condition. As a matter of fact, 80% of hypothyroidism is autoimmune, even when people don't realize this. Now, some of you raised your hand before and told me that you were autoimmune. You mentioned words like Hashimoto's and Graves'. These are diseases of autoimmunity. But most people with hypothyroidism are autoimmune and don't even realize it. And that kind of condition will never respond long term to any kind of synthetic thyroid hormone because it's not the cause of the problem. So my question to you is, has your doctor checked you to see if your hypothyroidism is autoimmune? And why not? Why wouldn't they?
We didn't know the process.
Well, that's one thing for sure. But they avoid doing it because the test is generally not cheap. And what are they going to do? Are they going to treat you any different? Nope. They're going to give you synthroid. They're going to give you Levoxyl. Your more contemporary, up-to-date doctors may say, you know what? The pig thyroid hormone, armor thyroid, or nature thyroid, is much better for you than the synthetic. Let's at least get you that. And I agree with that, and I'll explain why in a little while, but why it is better. But it's still not the answer. It's just a better Band-Aid. Okay? But wouldn't you like to know what's causing the cut?
Yeah.
Right? Myth number two, your blood work is fine, and so are you. Right? It must be in your head.
Yes.
Right? Anyone feel like my wife did? They're going to go postal? Right? Yeah, it's in my head.
Yeah.
Okay? It's not in your head, folks. Okay? It's just not in their head. All right? They don't understand it. The reality is that by the time your blood work shows any problems, most people have had symptoms going on for 10 to 20 years. Okay? This is not something that rapidly shows up in your blood. And not only that, when they look at your blood, what are they looking at? They're looking at TSH, right? Most doctors evaluate the gold standard of TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. And when they see those levels off, they say, hey, you have a thyroid problem. But if those levels are in their normal ranges, they say you don't have a thyroid problem, even though you have every symptom in the book. They say, I'm sorry, you're in normal ranges, it must be something else, right? Well, what are normal ranges? Well, the problem is that no study ever has been done that says if you're in normal ranges, there's no problem with your thyroid. Never. So where do they come up with that? Most doctors do not even look at the right ranges, which are known as functional ranges or optimal health ranges. When you go to the lab and you get your blood work done, we've all done that, right? So when you get that blood work, you have the thing they're testing, they have your number, then they have the lab ranges. And they flag you as high or low to indicate that there's a problem, right?
Yeah.
Where do they get those lab ranges from? You would think that those are ranges of normal physiological health, right? They are not. Those numbers are an average of the lab findings in that region of the country.
What?
That's all that is. Okay? So what we call normal here is not the same as they call normal in New York, or in Montana, or in California. How can that be? I know we're all different, but we ain't that different. Okay? So they're comparing you against the average of the people going to that lab. Now let me ask you the next question. Who's going to that lab more often? Healthy people or sick people? So if you fall within the average of the common sick people, they call you normal. How wrong is that? When I went to school, we learned what we called functional ranges from Guyton's textbook of medical physiology. It said this is the normal range for that system to be working correctly in the body. And those ranges have gotten bigger and bigger and bigger at the labs because people have gotten sicker, sicker, and sicker. So now we've seen this bigger and bigger variety, and we're calling this normal now. That's not normal, folks. Nowhere near it. As a matter of fact, when you look at TSH, they consider normal anything from 0.5 all the way up to 5.5, yet the research says anything greater than 2 indicates a problem with your thyroid. And that's a far away from 5.5. Remember Linda's? 278. Anyone feel like this?
Yes.
I felt like this in every doctor's office I ever walked into with Linda. I did my homework, right, as anyone should, and I went asking questions they could never answer. It drove me insane. I said, you're supposed to be the specialists. You're supposed to be the top guys. We searched you out for that reason. The reality is not everybody can know everything, right? But it's so frustrating because everyone gets taught their little box, right? And they see things their little way. And they're not really willing to look outside that most of the time. Right? It's very frustrating. Well, I've kind of dedicated my life to living outside the box because I found no help in that box. Right? And don't get me wrong, folks. I'm not saying that I'm against medicine. I'm against our healthcare system, or I'm against drugs. I'm not. I'm against the misuse and the abuse of those things. And when a doctor just puts you on a drug without actually understanding what's going on, or looking for the cause, or looking for a healthier option, that is abuse. When a doctor puts you on a drug for the rest of your life, you just have to keep taking this, that is abuse. Right? And it's not just thyroid medication. Cholesterol medication, blood pressure medication, antidepressants, right? Digestive aids. It's a bad, bad system that we have allowed to happen. We've got no one to blame but ourselves. It's supply and demand. Okay? But we have to stop demanding that kind of care. We have to start demanding care that really helps us. So what is the cause? This is it, folks. Write it down. There are 3 main causes to dysfunction of your thyroid. They're what we call the 3-legged stool. It does involve genetics, it does involve stress, and it does involve an intestinal condition called leaky gut. It takes all 3 to cause it, and it takes all 3 to solve it. So we're going to teach you how to do that. Everybody on board? Okay. All right. Now I'm going to take you back to, we talked about biology before, I'm going to take you a little back to biochemistry just for a few minutes. I know you guys are going to love this. You came here for that reason, right? You couldn't wait till I got to biochemistry. Well, I'm going to take a moment to write some things up here on the board, okay? And I'm going to have you follow along with me to understand step by step exactly what I tried to tell my wife's oncologist that he couldn't follow. But you're going to have the courteous kindness enough to actually listen to the whole story so you can understand it, okay? So let me take you through that right now. All right. Let's bring those lights up a little bit. I think you gotta press the other one. There you go. Okay. All right, everybody awake? All right, fasten your seatbelts. Here we go. Okay, up top, most of us have a brain. I say most of us because we're not sure about our husbands, right? Okay. So most of us have a brain. Now, in the brain, we have two major glands. We have the master gland called the hypothalamus, which I'm going to call H. He's like the president of the endocrine system. And then he has a vice president called the pituitary, or P. The hypothalamus and pituitary are constantly surveying what's going on below in your body to see the balance of all of your hormones at all times. So it knows when it has to rev something up or quiet something down to maintain proper function or homeostasis or balance in your body. Now, in the case of the thyroid gland, when the hypothalamus detects that our levels of thyroid hormone, which are T4 and T3, are getting too low, it will ask the pituitary to wake up the thyroid to make more. Okay? Now, the first thing it does is when that detects that low level, the hypothalamus releases something called thyrotropin-releasing hormone, TRH. And what that does is come around and give the pituitary an elbow and say, hey, time to wake up, do your job. And the pituitary says, oh, it's the thyroid you want me to wake up. Okay. So the pituitary sends another hormone signal. Remember, hormones are the chemical messengers of your body called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. Wake up, it's time to make more hormone. So that goes down to your thyroid gland, which wraps around your windpipe. So that's your thyroid gland, okay? And that TSH stimulates the thyroid gland to produce two hormones for us that we're concerned about tonight called T4 and T3. Now, does everyone know where the thyroid gland is? It's right here in your throat. Everyone take your hand and go like this and feel right along your windpipe. And you can feel the muscles, but do you feel something kind of squishy in there? Raise your hand if you feel it.
Like a goiter.
Okay? You'll really feel a goiter, right? If you feel it, there's a definite problem because you're not supposed to be able to feel it. Okay? If it feels nodular, if you have little lumpy bumpies on there, it means it's really been inflamed for a long time. And little things are growing and they shouldn't. Okay? So we don't want to be able to feel that. We know it's in there, but we shouldn't really be able to feel it. So what is T4 and what's T3? These are our thyroid hormones. Now T4 is the storage form of the hormone. It's the gas tank that you can't use yet. And when your body makes it, it makes a lot of that. It makes 11 parts of T4. T3 is the active hormone. This is the stuff that's really going to make a change in our cells the second it comes in contact. So it's very, very potent. As we learned before, it affects every one of our 100 trillion cells. But our body only gives us very little of that. It only gives us 1 unit of that for every 11 units of T4. Okay? Now, here's the problem with Synthroid, Levoxyl, Levothyroxine. All the synthetic thyroid hormone you're taking, it is just T4. There is no T3. So all it's doing is giving your body the gas to make the hormone. What if it can't? You can take all the synthetic thyroid hormone in the world. What if you can't make T3? Well, what happens? How do you make it? Well, let's talk about that. So when we get all this T4, it gets stored in another organ that some of us are familiar with called the liver. All right? Your liver does a lot of things for you, folks. Your liver does over 800 different known functions for your body. It doesn't just detoxify you. It's also your #1 fat-burning organ. Okay, so be kind to your liver. Ever wonder why if you drink you can't lose weight? Okay? So T4 gets stored in the liver until such time that the body says, well, I used up all that potent T3. I'd like a little more, please. So what it has to do is convert T4 into active T3. Well, how does it do that? Well, the 4 and the 3 have a meaning. There is a element, a mineral, that our body needs in order to make this hormone. You might be familiar with this. What kind of mineral do you need for thyroid function? Iodine. T4 is 4 molecules of iodine. T3 is 3 molecules of iodine. That's why they're called that. Now, to go from T4 to T3, we have to lose one, right? So we have to cut one off. So we want something to come in here and create a change. Now, there's another mineral that's necessary to do that. And if you don't have enough of this mineral, there's no way you can convert T4 to T3. Do you know what that is, anyone? Selenium. So selenium comes in and cleaves one of these molecules off to make T3. And now T3 can leave the liver and go on its way to do work for us. And where it's going to go is it's going to head out to our cells. So here comes our T3, heading on up. Now, again, we talked a little bit before about the cell. So the cell has an outer membrane that we talked about made of that saturated fat and cholesterol. And it has a nucleus inside with our DNA and our RNA, our genetic material. DNA tells the cell what its job is. You're a lung cell, you're a thyroid cell, you're a breast cell. RNA tells that cell how to replicate, how to duplicate itself. Okay? So this tells the cell its job, this tells the cell how to make more of itself to do more of that job. Now, what if something goes wrong with our DNA and our cell is confused about what its job is? Is that good or bad? That's bad, right? So we start getting abnormal function if our cells don't know what to do. Now, what happens if our RNA is not working right and our cell doesn't know how to produce properly? Either it doesn't make enough or it starts to make too much. What do we call it when we start developing 2 more cells and 2 more cells and 2 more cells? A tumor. Right? We develop cancer when our RNA goes wrong. So it's obvious we want DNA and RNA to work right. And they're surrounded by their own membrane called the nuclear membrane. And just like the health of this membrane, we have to be concerned about the health of that membrane. And I also talked about the fact that we were going to have these little organelles in there. And the ones we were really concerned about were the little red buggers. And they're called mitochondria. And guess what they're surrounded by? Their own mitochondrial membrane. Now we have to worry about that membrane. Okay? Now, there are only 40 to 60,000 mitochondria per cell. So there's a lot of membranes to deal with. They make a lot of energy. Okay? Now when this T3 gets up here, we learned before that every single cell has a receptor, a keyhole, that fits that key for that hormone to come in and create change. And this is how it works. The hormone comes in, it fits that keyhole, and then from there that sends a signal to the DNA and RNA and tells it to do something. It sends a signal to the mitochondria and tells it to do something. That's how our cells make decisions. Now, who remembers in school being told that the nucleus is the brain of the cell? Do you remember hearing that? I remember hearing that. Well, let me ask you, how long would you live if you took the brain out of your body? You wouldn't, right? Yet when we take the nucleus out of the cell keeps living. As a matter of fact, it lives almost exactly as long as it would be if the nucleus were there, and it does almost all of its jobs perfectly. Okay? So we learned quickly that the nucleus is not the brain of the cell. What is actually making the decisions of the cell?
Mitochondria?
The external membrane is where the receptors are being stimulated. The receptors then send signals to the mitochondria and send signals to the nucleus to tell the genetics how to express differently. Before we learned that genetics loads the gun but environment pulls the trigger. So what's the difference? If we're born with a certain set of genes, what makes a difference whether you express those genes or not? Your mother had cancer, your sister had cancer, you didn't. What's the difference? You're all sharing the same genes.
Stimulus.
The difference is what turns those genes on and off. Okay? And what turns those genes on and off is known as epigenetics. Epigenetics has become a new field in the study of genetics in the last few years. After we mapped the human genome and we figured out every single gene in the body, we thought we had it made. And this was going to be the salvation of all of medicine, right? We were going to fix everything genetically. Has it happened? No. Because we used to believe that it was one gene, one function. One gene, one function. So if you change this gene, you change that function. So we thought, well, we've got a gazillion functions. We must have a gazillion genes. And because we can function at a much higher level, than other animals and insects and things on this planet can, we must have a lot more genes, right? Makes sense? But when they mapped the human genome, they found out we have the exact same number of genes as a mouse and only 10 more than a worm. Doesn't make you feel very smart, does it? Right? But obviously there's a difference. There's a difference between us and a mouse and us and a worm. The difference is the sequence in which those genes get turned on and turned off. The coding. If you lined up a whole bunch of light switches and you flip them all in different directions, different lights will go on and off, creating a different effect. Right? It's all about the sequencing and the flipping. And that's called epigenetics. Epi means above. What is above the importance of the gene is what turns them on and off. Okay? And you have much more power to control that than you ever realized. The two things that control your epigenome more than anything else is what you put in your mouth and what you think about while you're doing it. Your thought processes immediately change genetic function. And the nutrients, or lack thereof, that go in your mouth directly change genetic function. All right? That's why someone who eats junk food their whole life is simply not going to be as healthy as someone who eats really good food. And why the pessimist, on average, is not going to be as healthy as the optimist. Okay? You can think yourself sick, and you can think yourself well. And you can eat yourself sick, and you can eat yourself well. Right? So you have a lot more control of that than you think. So we want to have this nice line of communication so the body knows what to do, right? Now, let's talk before we talk about those stress glands, those adrenal glands. Well, they can interfere with this process, all right? So let's draw those adrenal glands. Now, our adrenal glands live right on top of our kidneys. These are pretty sad-looking kidneys, I know, I'm sorry. Our adrenal glands are little walnuts that sit on top of our kidneys that do all kinds of important things for us. Not only do they control your stress reaction, but they help control your sugar metabolism, your sex hormones, your muscular strength and tone, your brain function, the ability to be sharp or foggy. Okay? Very much involved. Because let's talk about that stress reaction. All right? So let's say that we're sitting here enjoying our lunch at the zoo, and we notice a tiger's outside the cage instead of inside the cage. Right? And he's coming this way because he likes what you're having for lunch. So all of a sudden, what are you going to do? You're going to jump up, right? Fight or flight. And right away, your adrenal glands have to do one very important job. Keep blood in your brain. Okay? Because if you jump up and you go, anyone here jump up quick and go tweet, tweet, tweet? That ever happened? Guess what? You just became lunch. Right? We got no time for that. So what is responsible to not let that happen? Your adrenal glands pump out something called adrenaline. Adrenaline squeezes your blood vessels, shoots blood to your brain, says, okay, keep blood up there so you can focus, because believe me, your eyesight's about to get really sharp, right? Your hearing's going to improve, your sense of smell is going to improve, everything in a life that situation improves. And everything, your brain processes things, they slow down. So you can actually see, oh, I'm supposed to go over there, right? So these kind of things happen when you have a very stressful situation. So they pump out the adrenaline, or they're supposed to. If they don't, you get dizzy when you get up. If anyone here gets dizzy when they get up quick, it means you have an adrenal gland problem. Okay? So another hormone they pump out in reaction to that stress is something that is supposed to repair damage quickly, reduce inflammation of tissues that are really damaged in our body, and to do something different with our sugar metabolism and shift our sugar so we immediately get some increased power so we can either fight or run. The other hormone is called cortisol. All right? So our adrenal glands make cortisol in times of stress and in reaction to blood sugar elevations. Because what does cortisol do for our blood sugar? Well, let's say we just ate our lunch and the tiger left us alone. Okay? That then converts down to sugar molecules of glucose that are in our bloodstream that come along and say, hey, Mr. Cell, can I come in? And then Mr. Cell says, sure you can. I have a receptor called a glucose receptor. So glucose, you can come right on in. So glucose goes in, and where does glucose go? To the mitochondria to get converted into ATP for energy, right? So we want glucose to get into the cell, but eventually the cell is going to say, okay, I'm full. All my mitochondria have had enough to eat. So they then ask the pancreas to secrete a different hormone from insulin, because insulin opens the door, right? And the hormone that shuts the door is called glucagon. So insulin and glucagon are in balance, And cortisol elevates along with insulin because it says, okay, when all the sugar is used up that the cell can eat, there's still going to be some floating in the bloodstream. And one of my jobs is to send the signal to shut the door and also to mop up all that extra sugar that might be laying around that you obviously couldn't use, right? So cortisol mops up the extra sugar. And what it does is store it in the form of a fat globule called triglycerides. Anyone ever have high triglycerides in their blood work? That means you have a sugar metabolism problem, right? Because you're ingesting more sugar than your body can metabolize. And the extra gets stored as triglycerides. And enough of them get stored right here, we call it belly fat. Okay? So that's why we also see the muffin top along with adrenal gland stress. Right? Again, the whole estrogen, adrenal gland, cortisol, adrenal gland connection. So we know that cortisol gets made from the adrenal glands. Now, cortisol does a couple of nasty things to us. When cortisol levels stay elevated, because our stress doesn't go away, and it doesn't have to be the tiger there, it could be the fact that you're stressed out about your job, about money, about the kids, about work, about everything, right? You're stressed out about what I'm teaching you right now, okay? So it raises your cortisol levels, and we stay in a chronic state of stress. And that starts to really screw up our hormone balance, because it's not supposed to be that way. And your brain cannot tell the difference between the tiger and this chronic stress that you're imposing on yourself, okay? So cortisol does two things that interfere with our system here. When cortisol comes in contact with T3 and that's floating around, it's not supposed to be there all the time. And when they come together and bond, cortisol creates something called reverse T3. Reverse T3 looks identical to T3. So when the hypothalamus is looking down the bloodstream, if it sees reverse T3 there, it says, oh, I've got enough T3. Problem is, reverse T3 does not fit that same keyhole. Okay? And it will try to get in, and it'll come up, and what it'll do is it'll block or blunt that keyhole. Now, if that fills up that keyhole, and it can't get in, it can't be used, right? Now, it can't be used and it blocks it. What else can't get in? T3. The hormone that needs to get in can't get in. So reverse T3, blunting the hormones at their receptor site, puts a wall up and doesn't let the hormone get in. Okay? So anytime you're overstressed, your thyroid hormone can't work. All right? Same thing happens with another hormone that we're familiar with. We already mentioned him once. He's involved with sugar metabolism. When we get blunted, we start developing resistance to hormones. Have you heard of hormone resistance before? There's one particular one we think of called insulin resistance. And that's when insulin's trying to get in, but it's been blocked and it can't get in. So what happens? Anyone here have kids? Right? So the first time you ask the kids to clean up their room, do they happily go and do it?
No.
No. So you ask again and again, and you get louder and louder and louder. Eventually you're screaming at the kids. They have become resistant to hearing you. Right? Well, the cell membranes become resistant to hearing the hormones trying to get in. So we develop hormone resistance, and the gland that has to make that hormone tries harder and harder and harder, and eventually the pancreas burns out. Eventually the adrenals burn out. Eventually the thyroid burns out. And we develop hypothyroidism. Okay? Now another thing cortisol does for us, it's not very nice, but it says, okay, because all this stress is going on, and now you give me all this reverse T3 to bind to, I don't like that, I want you to stop. So what it does is it sends a signal all the way back up here to the pituitary, and it creates what we call a sluggish anterior pituitary. It shuts the pituitary down, so the pituitary can no longer send the signal of TSH to stimulate the thyroid. It's a feedback loop. It says, I'm getting too much of this, shut it down. So now it's shut down two ways. Right? It was shut down by the cortisol, and it was shut down when it couldn't get into the membrane. So think about this. Already you know more about hypothyroidism than most doctors you've ever spoken to. So here are some things that are causing hypothyroidism. It's not a lack of T4. It's the fact that you cannot convert your T4 into T3. It's a conversion issue. And a conversion issue could mean that there's a problem with your liver. The conversion factory isn't working. Maybe you don't have enough selenium. There's one more thing that you need, along with selenium, to convert your T4 to T3, that you're all very familiar with, which probably most of you also don't have enough of, called vitamin D. Raise your hand if you've been told you have low vitamin D. All right? Now, vitamin D cannot become vitamin D unless you have healthy cholesterol. Because vitamin D is actually not a vitamin at all. It's actually a hormone. It was misnamed. And what I tell you before, all hormones are made from cholesterol. So if you don't have a proper cholesterol balance, you can't make vitamin D. When they put people on cholesterol-lowering medications, they all get low vitamin D. When they get low vitamin D, their hormones don't work. Their immune system doesn't work. They get sicker and sicker. Pretty screwed up, isn't it? Right? So you just learned a couple of ways in which it really happens. It could be a problem with your liver. It could be too low selenium. It could be too low vitamin D. It could be too much cortisol, causing reverse T3. You just learned 5 ways in which hypothyroidism occurs that your doctor probably doesn't have a clue about. All right? And the good news is you can fix all of this stuff. All right? Isn't that good? That is good.
Yes.
All right. So let's dim the lights and go back over here. All right. So if most hypothyroidism is not due to a TSH, T4, or T3 deficiency, what is it due to? Well, as we said before, T3 is not getting its message into the cell due to blunted hormone receptors or hormone resistance. T4 is not converting to active T3, which makes your blood work seem normal. So in the blood work, they go, oh no, we see T4, we see T3. It's just not converting, okay? So it's not being used by the body. It's actually a liver-slowing vitamin D issue. Stress or cortisol can produce reverse T3 and block T3 receptors called RT3 dominance. Stress and cortisol also slows the pituitary, which is a problem with the hypothalamus-pituitary axis. Okay, it works with the hypothalamus-pituitary-thyroid axis, hypothalamus-pituitary-adrenal axis. Both of these lines of communication become a problem. So the last problem is you have a problem in your brain. Okay? Now again, you are what you eat. What you're putting in your mouth activates this stuff. So if you're not getting the right nutrients, this cannot work right. Okay, so there are certain nutrients we use to make sure that hypothalamus-pituitary communication is correct. Our clinics evaluate 3 blood tests that almost no other office does that tells us if you really have these problems. We look at reverse T3, serum selenium, and something known as 1,25-hydroxycholecalciferol vitamin D. Now that is the active form of vitamin D. When we do our blood test, we're looking at the storage form, just like we looked at the gas tank of T4, but it tells you nothing about whether you're actually able to use it. So we have to know if you're using it. And just like the T4 was stored in your liver, and you can have a conversion problem in your liver, vitamin D is also stored in your liver and gets converted in your kidneys. So if you don't have enough vitamin D in its active form, it's actually a liver and kidney problem, not that you need to take more vitamin D. Okay, and more often than not, when you take more vitamin D, it can create a deeper problem. All right, so just because it's low doesn't mean just automatically start taking it. So who here had low vitamin D and the doctor said, just start taking more vitamin D?
Need it sunshine.
Right? Now when you get sunshine, you're creating D2, the storage form, okay? And that gets converted with something called sulfates. You need sulfur in your body as well, okay? Along with cholesterol to produce active vitamin D, which is D3. So sometimes the doctors who are more up on it will say, I want you to take D3, the active form. But what if the problem is that your body isn't converting properly because it's really a problem with your liver and kidneys? Are you ever fixing the problem? No, right? And vitamin D is fat soluble, which means your body cannot wash it out. Vitamin C, vitamin B, some other vitamins are water soluble. They flush out what you don't need. Fat soluble vitamins don't flush out. And if you get too much, you start to screw your brain up. Okay? So you just keep pumping D3, and people come to you all the time, I'm taking 5,000 IUs of D3 a day. I'm like, well, why are we doing that? Did you have a level in your blood work that showed you were low? Yes, it was. Okay, great. Well, how long have you been doing that? I don't know, like 5 years. And when's the last time you had your blood work checked? Well, when they told me to take it. When you're taking vitamin D like that, you need to get your blood checked every 6 months. All right? Because if you go over that ledge, there's some serious consequences. It looks more like multiple sclerosis when that happens. Okay? So in quick summary, you're told your blood work is fine, and so are you. And why is that done? Why do you hear that phrase? Because your typical conventional doctor will not bother to do the right test to detect if you're autoimmune, if you have a hormone receptor problem, if you can't convert, if you have RT3 dominance. So the bottom line is, get the right tests. Does that make sense? Right? Step number 1, get the right tests. Sadly, conventional doctors will not even bother to do the right test because they don't know how to treat it. But we do the right test in our office, and we have to help anybody with that who wants it. Okay? Now, the number one test I'm concerned about is something that tells me, are your cells inflamed? Right? Don't we want to know if that membrane can't let good stuff in and bad stuff out? Because again, what happens if you have cellular inflammation? Everything. Good answer. Everything. Right? Hypothyroidism, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, autoimmunity, rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, allergies. Okay? So how do we tell if you have cellular inflammation? Would you like to know? I'm going to tell you. All right. There's a test called a meta-oxyurinalysis. The meta-oxyurinalysis tells us in minutes if you have inflamed, damaged, and dying cell membranes. It's a quick in-office urinalysis that lets us gauge the severity of your inflammation. And we scale it on a 0 to 7 scale. A 1 to 2 is normal. Anything above that is exponentially greater than the one before. So a 3 is 10 times greater than a 2, a 4 is 10 times greater than a 3, kind of like the earthquake scale. So when you start getting around 4, 5, 6, 7, we got some serious stuff going on. And the higher that number, the more ripe your body is for disease to be developing as we speak. Because your cells are inflamed and rupturing and dying all over the place. And you don't even have to have a symptom. Because this will happen long before the symptoms materialize. Okay? It's 50 times more accurate than any blood test for inflammation. So a lot of people say to me, well, I checked my inflammatory levels. I looked at my C-reactive protein. Anyone ever hear of that? Right? Or homocysteine. These are things we check on blood work, and they're fine to tell us a little bit about inflammatory markers, but they're very nonspecific. They could be from a torn muscle. They don't tell you anything about system-wide inflammation, where this test does. So how does this test do it? Well, when this cell membrane starts to become inflamed, it starts to create a chemical in the cell membrane called malondialdehyde. And once that membrane eventually ruptures, because that cell died, that malondialdehyde gets released into your bloodstream and then comes out in your urine, and we measure it in your urine. So there's a normal amount of malondialdehyde when a healthy immune system attacks a cell that's supposed to die, and that's that 1 to 2 range. Anything above that is abnormal. And the greater the number, the more cells are dying, the bigger risk of having disease going on. Okay? And when this happens, sometimes it's scary to me. Because when I measured my wife, she was a 7. When I measured any cancer patient I work with, they're a 7, every time. So what happens when the guy who comes into me and says, yeah, I think I might have a cold that won't go away, maybe it's allergies, I can't tell what's going on, and he has a 7. I get a little worried. I start ordering more tests that no one else is going to do, and we find out what's happening. It determines if your cell membranes are rupturing, if you're ripe for disease, and if your cells are actually aging prematurely. And I always like to ask, would you like to know that information? Would that be important? Would you do something with that information? Would you act a little differently if you knew what was going on? How much is a test like that worth? Right? To me, it's priceless, really. I couldn't pay enough to know that information. If I had that information 10 years ago with my wife, and we would be able to start doing things differently immediately, would the outcome have been differently? I think it would. Okay? So to me, that test is priceless. And I think every single person in America should have that test done on a regular basis. In our office, we do it every 3 months. When someone's in one of our programs to correct what we find, we do it in 3-month phases. At the end of every phase, we check again. And we don't let you go until you're normal. All right, so what's the solution? Well, we know that we have to deal with the 3-legged stool. We talk about stressors driving inflammation and causing problems. The inflammation turns on the bad genes and turns off the good genes. We don't want that. So what are your stressors? And I know none of you have any stress, right? Let's talk for a second about a normal, average, typical woman, a life in the day of a normal woman. So let's say this woman's a mom. She wakes up in the morning, drags her out of bed because she's exhausted from everything she did the day before. She goes downstairs, she makes herself a cup of coffee, and if she's like me, she likes her coffee with sugar and cream, because I like my coffee like I like my coffee ice cream. Right?
Walk and sleep. Walk and sleep.
Right? Just like I like my women. No, okay. So you have a cup of coffee, And then you're stressing about trying to get the kids breakfast, trying to get the kids out the door, make sure everybody did their homework, you're worrying about what you have to do for your job today, right? And I want you to start thinking about each step of this and what's going on in this person's body. We talked before about stress to the adrenal glands causing a rise in cortisol. Well, what stresses the adrenal glands? Number 1, lack of sleep. Number 2, caffeine. Number 3, sugar. So as soon as mom's been up in her first half hour, she just kicked her adrenal glands in the teeth. Right? Number 4, emotional stress. So now mom is getting everybody out the door. Thank God they're all gone. She can get to work. She gets in the car, realizes I never ate breakfast myself, pulls through that wonderful dining establishment we have called McDonald's. Right? And thank God now breakfast is offered all day long. Right? So she goes in, she gets another cup of coffee, she gets the Egg McMuffin, and she's sitting in traffic getting anxious and upset because she's already late for work and she's trying to eat this junk full of simple carbohydrates, trans fats, right? That's fully blocking her membranes, raising her cortisol even more. Then she gets to work where you know she's so appreciated. Right? And everyone says, he did such a great job, we're going to listen to all your ideas and give you a raise. Right? That never happens. Right? So she goes through a day where she's unappreciated. She comes home back to the kids who just are like, Mom, what's for dinner, what's for dinner, what's for dinner? She makes a beautiful, healthy, nutritious dinner, puts it on the table. I'm not going to eat that. I don't like that. Can't you make me something different? Right? She's not appreciated again at home. Then she deals with all the stress, getting the kids through their homework again, finally gets everybody to bed and says, thank God it's mom's time. Bring out the wine and the chocolate. Right? And if I'm lucky enough, I'm going to get a bubble bath. Calgon, take me away. Right? So what else stresses out the adrenal glands? Alcohol. All right? And what's in the chocolate? Sugar and caffeine. So now mom's liquored up and sugared up and caffeined up and tries to go to bed. Right? And guess what? She can't sleep. Right? Why can't she sleep? She has all these chemicals in her body, and what else is high? Cortisol. And what does cortisol balance? Melatonin. What is melatonin? Your sleep hormone. Cortisol goes up, melatonin goes down, you don't sleep. All right? Wakes up tomorrow, drags herself out of bed, and the cycle continues. Sound familiar to anybody?
Yeah.
Anybody think they might have an adrenal problem?
Yeah.
Right? Okay. So while I can't change your stress, I can change the way your body handles it. I can change the way your body adapts to it. I can feed your body what it needs for you as an individual to bring the inflammation down, to restore normal health and balance to your adrenal glands so it can help your thyroid work the way it was intended to. Does that make sense? All right. Now, what are the stresses we don't think about? The stresses we don't think about are toxins in our environment. And these are the most common and prevalent stressors that we're exposed to. So we could be a yogi doing yoga every day and deal with our emotional stress. We could try to eat organic food as much as possible and still be exposed to things in our environment that are actually the #1 cause of thyroid problems. So toxins cause inflammation of the cell membrane and therefore with the thyroid receptors. This then leads to autoimmune situations and drives more autoimmunity in the body. Studies have confirmed that certain toxins are the main culprits when it comes to your thyroid. So I'm going to go over what now we call the thyroid toxic top 5. So write these down. These are the top 5 toxins that will destroy your thyroid that you want to avoid at all costs. Number 1 is called PCBs and dioxins. Now these are found mostly in non-organic or conventional meat and dairy. So it's important to always get these foods organic. All your meat, all your dairy, all your fish should always be organic because they are very high in the conventional forms in PCBs and dioxins. Now the scary thing about PCBs and dioxins is they have not been allowed to be used in industry. They originally came as industrial runoff for at least 15 years. Yet when we take fetal blood samples of newborns, they all contain dioxins. That got passed on from the mom that is coming from the environment because they don't break down. As a matter of fact, not just dioxins, but there's a documentary out called 276. That has the number of toxins they find in the average newborn's bloodstream. Think we're destroying our future? 276. Okay. Number 2, pesticides. Anybody here like to garden? Right? Flower garden, maybe You're even trying to be good and you're even growing your own fruits and vegetables perhaps, all right? Does anyone ever use a chemical called Roundup? Roundup is probably the single most toxic thing on this planet, okay? Roundup contains a drug or a chemical called glyphosate. Glyphosate has been found to cause immediate destruction of something called your blood-brain barrier. Now, your blood-brain barrier is a physical ring at the base of your brain made of cholesterol, through which all the blood vessels pass to go to your brain, and they're supposed to filter out anything nasty and not let it come in. It's your protection fence, your blood-brain barrier. Okay? Glyphosate melts your blood-brain barrier. Does that sound like a good thing? So now all the nasties that want to get in there can get in there. All the chemicals, all the poisons can get into your brain. This is a big problem. And as a matter of fact, when you look at statistical charts showing the rise of dementia and Alzheimer's and match it against the rise of the use of glyphosate in our industry and industrial farming, it matches exactly. And it looks like a ticker tape. I mean, it goes up, down, up, down, up, up, down, and it matches every single peak and valley exactly. And then they said, that's really weird because I saw that same graph someplace else. The rise in autism. And it matches exactly. And what the makers of glyphosate, Monsanto, say is that it's perfectly safe for human beings. Glyphosate does not affect human cells. It only affects pest cells and microbial cells. And that's exactly true. But what they're not telling you is that it kills the good bacteria in your intestinal tract because it affects microbes. And the good bacteria in your intestinal tract control every single thing in your body. They control how every hormone works. They control how every organ and gland works. They control 90% of your immune function. Every time you eat a food, you get no nutrition from that food until it's first broken down by the bacteria, which mix it with their DNA to create a signal to talk to your cell's DNA to tell it how to use that food. Any herb, any vitamin, any medicine you take does nothing until it first mixes with that DNA. Now kill off all the good stuff and leave only the bad guys to mix with, and what happens? We start getting some bad results. Okay? And glyphosate kills the good guys. One thing it causes is brain swelling, and that brain swelling causes autism. Right? This was a recent find I just came out with. I was at a functional medicine conference in Utah a couple weeks ago for a week studying this exact thing. All right? They just found out about this. Excuse me a second. Gets me choked up. Research has shown that women who were just married to men who used pesticides like glyphosate were twice as likely to develop hypothyroidism. Now, how could that be? It's called being poisoned by proximity. He goes out and sprays the yard. It gets on his skin, it gets on his shoes, on his shirt, his pants. He comes in, gives you a big hug and kiss. It's now on you. And because of your hormone balance, especially estrogen, it makes you more susceptible to the effects. So you'll get it and he won't. Heavy metals, number 3. When I talk about heavy metals, I'm not talking about the music. You can like it or leave it. Right? I happen to like it. If they want to go to a concert, come with me. All right? But we're talking about the heavy metals that are found in our environment. And the number 1 heavy metal that we're found in our environment is in our internal environment, inside our mouths, which is mercury. Anyone here have any silver fillings? Silver fillings are 50 to 54% mercury. Every single day that you bite down on a warm food or drink a warm drink, you release more mercury vapor. As a matter of fact, you release 23 times the amount that's considered safe by our government for mercury exposure. I'm not kidding. Okay? Every single day. Now, does anybody here have a gold crown? If you have a gold crown, it draws the mercury out 10 times faster. It's a chemo-piezoelectric effect. Any other metal in your mouth can draw it out faster. Gold's the worst offender. Okay? Now,
What do you?
we'll get into it in a second. What happens is when that comes out, where does it go? Well, where's it closest to? Right? It loves to go to your brain, and not just your brain, your kidneys, your heart, and your liver. They did studies in a Swedish study that found that the more mercury amalgams you have, the more mercury we find in all of your organs. Makes sense, right? Now, why do they think we're complete idiots? All right, if I had a mercury thermometer, the good old-fashioned thermometer, and I broke it on this table, and a little bead of mercury hit that table, I am obligated to call OSHA, have them come in, curtain off this whole area, evacuate not just this room, not just this building, everything for miles around.
What?
Because the mercury is not so poisonous, it's the vapor that comes off it. So don't worry about people touching it. That vapor fills the room and poisons everybody and everything. If you put one drop of mercury in a lake the size of a football field, it would kill every plant and every fish in it, and it would be considered a dead lake forever. Nothing would ever grow there again. How about we put it in our mouths? Doesn't that sound smart? Right? Pretty scary. Now, the ADA and the AMA still have the standard, they take the stand that as long as it's in the filling, you're perfectly safe. Yet, researchers do not believe that. And there is a large body of growing dentists who say, I'm not on board with that. And they say there's no way to visualize the gas because you can't taste it, you can't smell it, you can't see it. We don't know if it's true. Well, a medical doctor and a dentist who said that's a bunch of BS created a documentary called You Put What in My Mouth? And they went to Home Depot and bought about $5.86 worth of equipment that came back and shined a special light and you could see the vapors coming right off. Go on YouTube and look up a video called The Smoking Tooth. Kind of like the smoking gun. So what do? You have to get it removed. And you don't just get it removed by any old dentist, because any old dentist can drill it out, and the second the drill hits it, you just made the poison 10 times worse, because the vapor gas escapes like crazy. All right? So you need to go to a specially trained dentist called a biological dentist. There are 2 governing bodies in the world that train biological dentists. There's one here in town, her name is Cheryl Billingsley. There's one in Fredericksburg, one in Williamsburg, and one in Charlottesville that I know of. Doesn't mean there aren't more, but they're not advertising. If they went through his training, I would think they'd be advertising.
What's the one?
So the one here is Cheryl Billingsley. So do not ask your dentist to drill these out, no matter if he tells you I can do it safely or not. Because if he's not trained properly, I guarantee you he's not going to do it right. Or she. Okay? The protocol is 6 pages long. Anyone here ever have a silver filling drilled out and replaced with a white filling? Mm-hmm. Right? Yeah. So when they did that, the dentist was wearing a hazmat suit, right? And they had a big vacuum extractor under here to suck the vapor out. And they had you on oxygen at all times. And they had you using special rinses before and after to chelate and bind.
Sure.
Right? Okay? Special ventilation fans in the room to make sure they didn't kill their staff. Right? Scary stuff. Look at some of the symptoms of mercury poisoning. Do any of these kind of look like thyroid symptoms?
Yep.
Because mercury toxicity is the #1 thing that goes up and blocks your cell receptors in your body and your brain, preventing that thyroid hormone from getting in and can cause hypothyroidism. Heavy metal #2, lead. Now you may remember when we were all kids, we used to teethe on toys made from China with lead paint, right? Or lead was in the paint that was in our homes. If you live in a home that was built before 1978, there is lead in your walls. There's lead in the wood, there's lead in the drywall, lead in the paint. Even if you didn't live in that home, who did? Your parents. Right? If your parents lived in that home, they were exposed to it. Your grandparents were exposed to it. Fuel, yep. Right? Lead in the gas, the vapors, it's an industry. Right? There's a lot more lead in our environment than you realize. It's around us quite a bit. The #1 source is your mom, because she was nice enough to pass it on to you. Right? So what happens? Lead has an affinity for bone, so it goes and hides in your bone. And it can lead to osteoporosis, among other things. right? Because it pushes, if lead goes in, calcium goes out. If mercury goes in, calcium goes out. All right? So lead goes in the bones. And now your mom's body's living with this, but it doesn't like it doesn't want it. And then you get pregnant. Your mom gets pregnant. And your mom's brain is really smart and goes, thank God, in 9 months there's a bus leaving this place and I'm piling all the lead on it. Okay? So at the end of the pregnancy, the mother's body shifts all the lead out of her bones and into the baby, and the baby's expelled. So who here was the firstborn in their family? You got the lead.
Wow.
Okay? And the firstborn child that you have gets the lead. And it passes on. Okay? Unless it's extracted properly. There's special ways to do that safely. Now, along those lines, I want to beg you again, just like you don't just go to any old dentist, don't go to Whole Foods on the way out of here and get the heavy metal detox off the shelf. That is extremely dangerous. Okay? And there are natural ways of helping your body deal with this, things like chlorella, but it's not strong enough to get it out of the cells it's actually already bound into, like in your brain. There's other things you need for that. And it has to be done safely, and it has to be done slowly, and it is not a fast process. It can take years to do it safely. Because what you don't want to do is drag it out and auto-intoxicate, re-poison everything as it's passing through. So your body has to be prepped a certain way to do this. So with my patients, even when they go to the right dentist to get it removed, I put them on a 6-week protocol to prepare their liver, their kidneys, their gastrointestinal tract, and their brain for anything that might escape. Because even in the best scenario, a little bit's still going to escape. Okay? So when you have a lot of lead in your body, what else can it cause? Brain or nerve damage, hearing problems, stunted growth, digestive problems. Okay? So maybe your husband with the big belly who doesn't have good digestion, who claims he can't hear you, is really just lead poisoning. And brain damage. Okay. So how do you know if you have these problems? Again, do the right tests. You have to test for heavy metals. And there's 3 ways to test it. You can test your hair, your blood, and your urine. Your hair shows the heavy metals that have been stored up in your body for a long time. If your body's really holding on to them and not letting them go, you won't see the metal itself come out, but you'll see the minerals being pushed out. I said mercury pushes out calcium, lead pushes out calcium. So if I see a high calcium level on a hair test, it tells me something's kicking it out. You've got mercury or lead. All right? If your body was good enough to get some of it out, you'll actually see the mercury coming out, or the lead, or the copper, or the nickel, or the platinum, or vanadium, or any of these other metals you're exposed to. But without doing the right test, you would never know. Blood tests only show what you've been recently exposed to, what's been floating in your blood for the last week. Urine will only show what your body is able to excrete. And again, without using an agent to ask it to excrete, you typically will not see it in the urine. Sometimes you will. Number 4 on the thyroid toxin top 5 is BPA. Does that sound familiar? Right? Bisphenol A? So BPA, where have we heard that before? Plastic, right? Hopefully we're all drinking out of bottles that are BPA free. Because we started to realize a few years back that BPA and these other metals are what we call endocrine disruptors, hormone disruptors. And what they do is throw your hormone balance off, and people are getting all kinds of screwed up by drinking from something that contains these plastics, right? And it's not just water bottles, it's all your plastics. Anyone here heat up anything in a microwave in plastic? Please tell me no. Okay? Anytime you heat up anything in plastic, even the microwave safe bowls, this stuff gets released. Okay? And it goes into the food and you eat it. Don't do that. Do not leave a water bottle in your car that get heated by the sun and then drink it, or put it in the fridge and then drink it. You've released the BPA and the other chemicals much more into that. Drink out of
freezing water bottles.
And freezing can have a similar effect. Okay? Heating is worse, but freezing, expanding and contracting that plastic can release more of the chemicals into the water. Okay? So just keep it room temperature, not exposed to the sunlight, or just in the fridge. Or better yet, drink out of glass and steel. Okay? So BPA is not just found in plastic bottles. Where else is it found?
Endocrine problem?
It causes endocrine problems. It's an endocrine disruptor. Okay? So where else do we find? I'll give you a hint. There's a picture.
Makeup.
Right? Cosmetics. Very high in BPA. Your lipsticks. Your nail polish. Your eyeliners. And not only that, but if you use bright red lipstick or dark black eyeliner, both of those contain lead. Okay? It's in the form of something called coal. Coal is lead. HL, I think. Okay, HOL like the store. It's also in the lining of every food can, unless it says BPA free. So when you get your organic veggies, don't get them in a can. Okay?
It's in cans.
It's in cans. BPA's in cans.
Soda cans too, right?
Soda cans? More food cans. Because food cans have that kind of a plastic liner to it.
Yeah, I thought there was a plastic
Right.
film.
Sometimes there is. It's more the food cans than it is the soda cans, but sometimes it is. And soda has all kinds of other issues with it, besides the sugar and all the other chemicals. There's very strong cancer-causing agents in soda, especially when you combine phosphoric acid like you have in cola, and then they add vitamin C to some of these sodas trying to make it better. When you add vitamin C to phosphoric acid, it makes a chemical that causes cancer. Yep. Okay. Studies show that even very low doses of BPA can affect the thyroid and cause hypothyroidism. Number 5, halogens. Halogens are a family of minerals. Okay, and these, the ones that we're most concerned about, are fluoride, bromine, and chlorine. Where do we find fluoride? Toothpaste, and where else? Water. Where do we find bromine? I'll give you a hint. It's in the middle picture. Soda. Right? We just talked about soda being a problem. Here's another reason soda is a problem. Soda contains bromine, as does every bread. Okay? Where do we find chlorine? Right? Our drinking water, and how about if we're trying to exercise? Pool. All right? So chlorine, you may not realize, is deadly. Right? They made mustard gas out of chlorine during the World Wars to kill the enemy. That was chlorine. Right? Pump in the mustard gas and they die. Right? Why do we put chlorine into our pools? To kill things. Right? It's poisonous. If you look at a tube of toothpaste, you ever notice some can have a skull and crossbones on them? And it says never swallow more than the amount used to brush your teeth, and never use more than the size of a pea. Why? Because it's poison. And if a child, an average 5-year-old child, ate a tube of toothpaste, they would die. So I have a brilliant idea. Let's make it bubblegum flavored. That won't attract them. What marketing genius came up with that? Right? It is poison. You have to realize that. All right? Now, our issue here with the thyroid is we talked before about how thyroid hormone is made up of iodine, and it's the iodine that actually gets attracted into the receptors. But fluoride, bromine, and chlorine are all what we call competitive inhibitors for iodine, which means they will fit the same receptors, and the more of those you have that you ingest, the more receptors you fill, thyroid hormone can't get in. Okay? So you go swim in the pool thinking you're doing something good for yourself, come out and chug a big glass of water, top off later with a Coke, go home and brush your teeth, and now your thyroid hormone can't work. Okay? So how do we know if you're toxic? How do we know if any of these metals are affecting you? Well, besides the test of checking your hair or urine or blood, we can tell if it's already affecting you, if it's already causing inflammation in your body. Because when these metals bind, especially to your cell membranes, they affect your brain. And when they affect your brain, they affect your vision. So we do a special kind of vision test called a visual contrast sensitivity test that tells us about your ability to discern shades of light and dark. And when you fail that test, it tells us your optic nerves are inflamed. When your optic nerves are inflamed, it means your brain's inflamed. And where you fail that test, according to charts, tells us, is this most likely due to heavy metals? Is this most likely due to an imbalance in the healthy bacteria in your gut so you can't digest your food properly, so you can't get the right nutrients and fats there to protect your brain? Is it most likely due to another pathogenic organism, like a parasite or a bacteria, like a Borrelia spirochete, also known as limes? So we can tell all these things, all right, based on the tests that we do. And if we tell where it's coming from, we can correct it. If you don't know where it's coming from, you can never correct it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Right? You have to find the cause to correct the cause. So solution. Remember, get to the cause again. We talked about stress. We talked about the gut. So now our question is, how healthy is your gut? We said that third stool was something called leaky gut, which has to do with affecting what's known as our microbiome or microbiota, which is the balance of bacteria, viruses, molds, fungi, and even other little critters that are supposed to live in there. We said earlier you're made up of 100 trillion cells, right? Well, guess what? you're made up of more microbes than you are cells. 10 times more. You have 10 times more microbes in your body than you do cells. And without those microbes, you would not be alive. Before we talked about how important the mitochondria are to make the energy for every single cell in your body, mitochondria are bacteria. And we live in this world where we think bacteria is the enemy and we want to kill all bacteria, right? Put in the hand sanitizers, right? Take antibiotics. We're killing ourselves, people, right? We're killing ourselves. Everything that disrupts this disrupts everything. Talk about depression and anxiety. We typically take something called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, to help combat those things. Because serotonin is our happy hormone. It makes us happy and less anxious. And so if we can use that more slowly and prevent our body from taking it back up faster, we can be happier longer. So we take these drugs that are selective reuptake inhibitors. It stops the body from using it up so fast. So basically it recycles your serotonin. Now that sounds great, except it's working on the serotonin that's made in your brain, which is 10% of your body's serotonin. 90% is made right here in your gut bacteria. So if you take this drug just to recycle the 10% and that eventually burns out, you need more drugs and different drugs because it doesn't work anymore. Who's taking care of the 90%? Right? This is what really keeps you happy. This is what keeps your hormones in balance. Your gut bacteria make every neurotransmitter, every brain hormone you have. Okay? Your brain cannot work right without that. Brain fog, depression, anxiety, anger, psychoses, seizures. So how healthy is your gut? Let's talk about leaky gut, the third leg of the stool. Anyone here ever heard the term leaky gut before? Right? A lot of us have. We're becoming more savvy. A lot of people are starting to hear these terms and realize what it is. So let's talk about your gut lining. Your gut, okay, your intestinal tract. Your gut means your stomach, your intestinal tract. It also means your liver and gallbladder, your organs of digestion. Okay? We're going to talk particularly about your intestinal tract now. In your intestinal tract, it's lined with skin, just like you have on the outside. And your skin has pores. Well, the pores of your gut is where the good stuff comes in and the bad stuff gets expelled, right? And those cells here have these openings or gaps for little pores. And the cells in our intestinal tract are special. They have these little filaments that move things along our gut, right? Enable bowel motility, so things will keep moving along. Food gets taken in, waste goes out, keeps moving along, and eventually it comes out to the toilet, right? So we want healthy movement, and we also want what we call tight junctions. We want healthy movement with just small holes for fully digested food particles to be able to drop in, right? We don't want undigested food getting in. We don't want heavy metals getting in. We don't want parasites. We don't want bacteria getting in. So they're supposed to be itty-bitty tiny. Now, when you have inflammation in your body, and before we talked about some of the things that cause inflammation, like medications like non-steroidal anti-inflammatories cause inflammation in your gut. Antibiotics immediately destroy it. Okay? High sugar, high caffeine, high alcohol all destroy it. So we get inflammation of our gut lining. So now the cells here are getting inflamed. And just like the membranes before got inflamed and got destroyed, these start to get destroyed. And what happens here is the little finger-like projections start to die off. And now we only have a couple left on each cell, and we have these big holes that bad guys can get in. We've created leaks in our gut. Okay? So we get leaky gut. That stuff comes through. Now, one thing that can develop is food intolerances. Because before I said undigested food particles are not supposed to get through. Create a big hole, and here you have a big undigested food particle has not yet been broken down and can drop in. Well, when that drops in, the protein structures that make up that undigested food particle look very similar to the bacteria that just tried to get through, or the parasite that just tried to get through. So when it comes in, your immune system starts to attack your food, thinking it's the enemy. This creates a problem. If it only happened once or twice, no big deal. But what do we usually do about 3 times a day? Eat. So it keeps happening over and over. And as it starts to get happening more and more, some of it gets passed, right? And so the immune system at the gut level says, hey, some of those guys got past me, and I recognize them as the enemy. So it sends out a signal to your entire body, a system-wide alert that says, anywhere you see this stuff that got past me, attack it, destroy it. And it's just food, right? Well, we said before, you are what you eat. So what does that food get made into? into cells, into tissues, into organs, into glands, into your thyroid. So now your immune system is being told, attack that tissue, and just so happens to be in your thyroid. Or in your pancreas, diabetes, or in your brain, dementia. Okay? So your body starts attacking itself, leading to what we call an autoimmune condition. So if you can heal the gut, you can heal the autoimmunity. You can reverse this process. It takes a little while. I created something called the Intestinal Integrity Protocol. It takes 3 to 6 months, but you can heal this problem. Does that sound good?
Yes.
All right. So leaky gut, along with the downward spiral of food allergies and intolerances, are a known cause of autoimmunity and thyroid conditions. So one test we do to find out if you have this is we want to know, what is your immune system reacting to that's not supposed to? Is your immune system ever supposed to attack your food? No, right? So we take a blood test, and we compare you against 150 different food items. And we put your blood in 150 petri dishes, and we put the food in there, and we watch and see, does the food get attacked by your white blood cells? Because it shouldn't. If it doesn't, these are your safe foods. If it starts to attack, we've got a problem. If there's a raging war going on, we've got a big problem. So in this particular person, they should never eat green peas, eggplant, or white potatoes. They're causing massive destruction of their intestinal lining and autoimmunity. Okay, leading to disease. They also should stay away from tomatoes, sweet potatoes, celery, and cauliflower because they're starting to cause a problem. Now the nice thing about this is, in the protocol, you can fix this in 6 months. Okay, wouldn't that be good to know? Wouldn't you like to know what you should be eating or shouldn't be eating? Right? Because you could think you're doing the best thing in the world for yourself, and you're actually killing yourself. And you may never have a gastrointestinal symptom. Your symptom may be, I eat eggplant today, and 3 days later I get a headache. I eat a sweet potato today, and 2 days later I can't sleep. I eat a green pea today, and a day later I get diarrhea. Right? It could be completely unusual symptoms from anything you think it might be. And it typically takes 48 to 72 hours to show. So it's very hard to try to figure out what you're sensitive to in your food. All right? Because there can be cross-reactivity, there could be interactions. You could be okay if you eat this, but if you eat this and this, you're not okay. So we need to know, we need data. Without data, we can't fix. Right? So this actually shows a white blood cell in the presence of food it's not reacting to, and the white blood cell in the presence of food it is reacting to. It explodes itself and shoots out chemicals to destroy that food. The chemical you're very familiar with is called hydrogen peroxide. So when you have a cut and you want to kill the bacteria, what do you put on it? Right? And what happens? It bubbles up because the hydrogen peroxide is breaking down the oxygen that kills the bacteria. The hydrogen peroxide is actually melting the cell membrane of the bacteria. But what happens to the skin around it? It usually turns white because you killed your own cells too. Right? Cells get killed by hydrogen peroxide. So this spits it out to kill it. The major causes of leaky gut are toxins like heavy metals that we talked about and Roundup like we talked about, but also something called hybridized or GMO foods. Right? We're all familiar with that now, I think? GMO means genetically modified organism. We decide to go in and start changing the DNA of our food to try to make it better. Let me ask you a question. When did man ever become smarter than God? Right? Whether you're spiritual or not, called God or Mother Nature, we try to improve it, we screw it up every time. Right? So this process began as far back as the 1970s, what was called the new grains or hybridized grains. What happened was a very smart doctor was actually trying to solve the problem of world hunger. And he had a great idea. Let's create a special kind of wheat, which is very easy to grow. It's probably the largest crop around the world, so we can make a lot of it. And not only that, we can make it super potent. We can change its genetics and genetically modify it and hybridize it so that it contains 7 times more protein than it's supposed to, and that protein is called gluten, and twice as much of a super sweet sugar called amylopectin A in this little grain. That way we can bring it to starving areas. We don't have to give them a lot, but they get a lot of protein from it, and they get some sugar from it for energy. Okay? And that was a valiant idea. But what we didn't realize is when you screw with Mother Nature, you screw with everything. And that genetic modification was not recognized by the body. It caused inflammation in the gut, which creates leaky gut, which creates an attack, which creates a change in your hormones, which creates obesity. So he was trying to solve world hunger. Instead, he created world obesity. Another GMO grain is corn. Corn is grain, not a vegetable. Okay, and the GMO grain is called BT corn. And BT corn, every time you eat it, has been shown to cause holes directly into your gut lining. So when you go out to Mexican, you eat that whole bowl of chips, you just create some problems. Okay? It drives inflammation throughout your body as soon as that happens. Now, get this. Butchers in the sausage making industry started to notice when they were taking out the intestines, I know this is gross, but they were taking out intestines from the pigs as a casing, that the intestines, which used to be thick and rubbery like a bicycle inner tube, were becoming cellophane thin. And when they took them out, they were smelling and putrid and rotting. And they would just tear, and they could not make sausage. So the sausage industry was going down the tubes. So the butchers brought this to their attention. The sausage industry makers went to the FDA and begged them and said, please, you have to ask the pig farmers to stop feeding GMO grains to pigs. It's destroying their intestines. And the FDA said, oh my God, we can't have that. We need sausage. So don't feed it to the pigs, but keep on giving it to people. Okay? Does that make sense? It's crazy. It's crazy. Right? Does anyone know how we got white flour? There used to only be wheat flour.
Bleach.
Right? So then they wanted to make the flour more cheaply, and they wanted to extract the kernel from it, the part that actually has the actual nutrition to it. And in the bleaching process, they take out the whole grain part of it, and they just leave the white flour. And they would then make food sources out of that and feed it to cattle. So they were saving the good stuff for people and giving the white flour to cattle. Then the white flour started screwing up the cattle. Right? The flour broke down to sugar very rapidly, which created inflammation, which created hormone problems, and all the cattle started having digestive disorders and intestinal diseases and started dying. So again, the cattle farmer said to the FDA, we can't have this. I said, you're right, switch it. Give the whole grains to the cattle, give the white flour to man. Wonder bread. To wonder any of us are alive. Right? Think about how screwed up that is. It's all driven by money. It's all driven by industry. So then, even if we got the whole grain, they went ahead and genetically modified it, so now that's poison. Scary stuff. Okay. They did a study where they took 168 just weaned pigs. They just came off mom's milk. They then fed them exactly the same food, but half was organic and half was GMO. They found that GMO-fed pigs were up to 4 times more likely to get severe stomach inflammation. That's 400%. Just eating the same food, just genetically modified. BT corn is so genetically modified that now they actually put the pesticide, the glyphosate, right in the seeds before they put it in the ground. So as it grows, it produces its own pesticides, so it fights the bugs off, so they don't have to keep spraying and spending more money. Well, great. Who eats that corn? You do. And you eat the animals that eat that corn, right? Because it's being fed to the cattle, the chickens, the pigs, even the trout and the salmon are being fed the corn on the farms, right? Now that goes into your body, and that pesticide-producing DNA of the plant mixes with your gut bacteria DNA, and you become a human pesticide factory making pesticides from the inside out. I don't know about you, but it's starting to sound like Frankenfood. Right? This is getting scary. You have to wake up, realize what's going on, and put your foot down. You have to turn away from buying these things, because if we keep buying them, they're going to keep selling them. Right? So how do you know if your fruits or vegetables have been genetically modified? That little number, that label that's on your Chiquita bananas, right? If it starts with a number 4, it means it's conventionally raised with pesticides and herbicides. If it starts with a number 8, it means it's genetically modified. If it starts with a number 9, it means it's organic. So remember, never eat 8, 9, you'll be fine.
Don't eat 4.
I would not prefer 4, it's full of pesticides and herbicides. Right? So try to get the ones that start with a 9. And while we all know that organic food is more expensive than regular food, it's really come down quite a bit. I was looking at conventional bananas next to the organic. It was 15 cents difference. Okay? Why not choose the organic? Not only that is it the pesticide issue, but the organic soil is treated differently. It's tilled a certain way for years before that plant gets grown in it. So the nutrition in the organic soil is much greater than conventional soil. So for example, a cup of spinach you get today is not the cup of spinach your grandparents got. As a matter of fact, it would take 40 cups of spinach today in conventional spinach to equal 1 cup of organic spinach calcium level. 40 cups to 1 cup for the same amount of calcium. Because the soil is being tilled just to grow a plant, not to grow with any nutrition. All right? So when you buy organic, you're buying a much more nutrient-dense product. And it's free of poisons. Okay? Now that being said, remember I talked about how the 0 grams trans fat on the label is a lie? Well, sometimes the organic label is a lie. So on the bag, if you're eating a bag of something, let's say it's organic corn chips, okay? If the label is on the front of the bag, it must contain at least 75% organic ingredients. If it's on the side of the bag, 50%. If it's on the back of the bag, 25%. So if it says on the back, made with organic ingredients, it only has to be 25%. So you actually have to look ingredient by ingredient. It has to say organic, 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 or the front has to say 100% organic. And don't be fooled by the words all natural. It means absolutely nothing. All meat is all natural. It's natural, it's a meat. It was made from God. Right? You poisoned it after the fact, but it's still natural. So don't be fooled by the words all natural. It means absolutely nothing in the food industry. They can put it on anything for any reason. And if you still eat GMOs and you're not so upset by all this stuff, keep in mind that in every test ever done, it caused tumors. Every time. All right, so let's recap. If you're looking for the cause of hypothyroidism, this is what you need to do. You need to get the right tests done, right? So we need to check for thyroid antibodies to evaluate if your condition is actually autoimmune because it's treated completely differently. We need to look for serum selenium to see if there's a conversion issue. We have to look at your free T3 in ratio to reverse T3 to find if you actually have a chronic toxicity, stress, or adrenal issue. We have to do the correct heavy metal testing, and we have to check you for your food sensitivities and allergies and the presence of leaky gut, just to find out what's going on with you. Right? That's the first step that has to be done to actually figure out what's happening and correct your problem. Now, when people come to me, I'm an expert at a lot of things, but I'm not an expert at everything. And so we want to make sure that people are in the right place when they come to us for help. So on an initial visit, we do a series of tests that lets us know if you're in the right place and if we think we can help you. Because if we don't think so, we don't want to go any further. We don't want to waste your time. So when someone comes to us on our first visit, the number one thing we do is that meta-oxy urinalysis to tell us if your cells are inflamed throughout your body, because isn't that the most important thing to know? Right? We also do that visual contrast sensitivity so we can tell and find out if the inflammation has crossed into your brain and where it's coming from. We also do something called a neurotoxic questionnaire where I look deeply at your history, to look at your exposure to certain metals, your exposure to certain toxins that you may have never thought about, so I can track it down. We also do a body composition analysis where we use a technique called bioimpedance with a small electrical charge that's painless and goes through your body and tells us not just how much you weigh, but what of that ratio is fat compared to muscle. And not only that, very importantly, what percentage of your weight is visceral fat. Visceral means organs. We want to know how much fat is in around your organs. The more inflammation you have, the more fat builds up around your organs. The more fat builds up around your organs, the more chemistry is created to kill you slowly and drive up your inflammation even more. One of the reasons why we have high blood pressure when we're overweight is not because we have more density to push the weight through. That was the old thinking. We now realize that abdominal fat creates 15 different chemicals to ensure its own survival, one of which raises your blood pressure. The reason for that is abdominal fat does not have any direct blood supply. It can't feed itself. It relies on blood that's left over. So it squeezes blood vessels to squeeze the blood out and wash over it and feed itself. How smart is that? That's like the blob from the 1950s. Right? That's just one thing it does to you. All right? We also do some other evaluations where, because if you remember I told you we have a program called Get Into Balance, the neuronutritional approach, we also look at your neurologic function, we look at your spinal balance. We look at how your body relates to your environment, to gravity, and to the floor. We do special imaging of your feet and your arches to tell us if your brain's getting the right feedback when you touch the floor to maintain proper spinal balance. So there's lots of different things that we do on our first visit to find out what's going on with you. We do a special blood pressure test that lets me know if your adrenal glands are healthy or not. Okay, again, remember when you get up and go tweet, 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 right? Well, you may not even know you're going tweet, tweet, tweet. But we measure your blood pressure and we see that it's not doing what it's supposed to be doing. We know we have an issue that we have to look at further. So that first visit takes us 2 hours. And we go through all these tests and we sit down and go over every result with you. So we know exactly if you have a problem and where it's coming from. Because armed with that information, you can do what? Take action. Right? Because how are you ever going to get well if you don't take action? Let's go back to where we began. Are you going to be a 3%er? Or are you going to be a 97%er? You going to go home and just continue to live on Sunday Isle? Or are you actually going to do something about what brought you here today? I'd like you all to shut your eyes just for a moment, because I want you just to calm down for a second. And I can see you all, I can see if your eyes are open. You got to shut them. I'm coming up one by one. What I want you to do is I want you to clear your mind, clear the slate. Now I want you to think about why you're here tonight. I want you to think about what drove you finally to take the action of actually coming here tonight. What would your life be like 1 year from now if you did absolutely nothing to change the course you're on? How about 5 years from now? I want you to erase that image. Now I want you to think again. What would your life be like if you actually took action on what I taught you tonight? What would your life be like if you actually got the right tests done and you knew what the cause was and you knew how to correct it? What would your life look like 1 year from now? What would your life be like 5 years from now? Now open your eyes. Now raise your hand if you like the second better than the first. Right? And if you didn't, I failed. I obviously can't help you. But if you did like that version and that vision of your life better, act on it. Come on in and get some tests done. All right? Let us help you. Now normally those tests, all that stuff we do for those 2 hours costs $680. When we have someone come in from a presentation, we do it at our cost, which is $347. So you're all able to get that. You're all welcome to come in and get all that done to find out exactly, once and for all, the cause of what's going on and how to fix it. We can then direct you from there. If we think you're an appropriate candidate for any of our programs, we'll tell you what we think you need to do. Okay? But we don't even have a clue unless we have some data on you. So we invite you all to come in for that if you would like. Now, we do require a deposit when you make the appointment for that. Because I'm taking 2 hours of my time to block out for you, we require that you pay $47 at the time you make that appointment. You can then pay the balance when you come in, but I'm hoping that $47 is enough to actually make you show up. Because I used to just schedule people and then they wouldn't show up, and I wasted 2 hours of my time. That means I wasted 2 hours from someone else that could have been sitting in that seat. That could have been my wife. And I'm not going to let that happen. So I'm going to ask you to respectfully not waste my time. I'm not going to waste your time. The ladies in the back of the room are going to be available to set up any appointments for anybody who would like to do that. $47 now, $300 at the time of service, and we'll find out once and for all what's going on. Leave with this thought. It's really simple. If you change nothing, nothing will change. Right? Be a 3%er. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.